When something in Sunny's chest shattered, the hidden enchantment of the Midnight Shard, Unbroken, came into effect and opened the floodgates of power to support him in the desperate, defiant last stand. Of course, the blood weave was enhanced by it, too, boosting its restorative powers. The virtuous cycle was complete, simultaneously making him much stronger and bringing him away from death's doorstep. Changing Star's sword whistled through the air, aiming to pierce his flesh, and was thrown aside by the forceful push of the austere Takai. For the first time since the beginning of their brutal fight, Sunny didn't reel because of the violent shock reverberating through his bones. Now, he had reached the absolute pinnacle of his power potential. With his core fully saturated, the shadow wrapped around his body, the blood blossom filling his memories with frenzied might, and the unbroken enchantment of the stalwart blade doing the same for his body. Sunny was as strong as he would ever be before becoming an awakened. Now, he was finally able to match Nephis. Almost, astoundingly, incredibly, irrationally, she was still stronger. Sunny howled, demanding to know how. Damn it. Sunny moved and fought, blood seeping from his terrible wounds. Although the gap in power between him and Changing Star had diminished significantly, it was still there, making him miss his attacks by a fraction of a second, be too late to block and deflect by a hair's breadth. He was still losing, as the two of them clashed furiously. Sparks of burning metal flying into the air from the point where their swords met. The light of the artificial sun had grown dim and unstable, and the Crimson Spire continued to break apart. At some point, an enormous piece of granite crashed into the vast balcony, showering them with a rain of sharp splinters. A net of cracks appeared on the stone surface beneath their feet, slowly widening as more debris fell down. Both of them were thrown to the ground by the shockwave of the collision, but immediately got up, lunging at each other with dark, murderous determination. Sunny dodged the tip of the silver longsword and thrust his Takai forward, leaving a deep cut on Neph's forearm, slicing her muscles apart. At the same time, she made a step forward and slammed the pommel of her sword into his mauled clavicle, making Sunny's mind explode with pain. He heard someone scream, their voice hoarse and full of indescribable suffering. Then realized a moment later that that bestial voice was his own. Soon, the scream turned into a growl. He wasn't done yet. He refused to be defeated. He refused to give up. He still had a chance to win, because through all of this, Sunny had continued to push himself toward mastering the first step of the shadow dance. Just before something shattered in his chest, thus causing the Midnight Shard to open the well of hidden power, he had sensed an approaching epiphany. It was already there, at the precipice of his mind. But his body was not strong enough, not malleable enough to manifest it into reality. Or at least it had not been before receiving the boon of the Unbroken. Now, everything changed. Sunny felt that he would be able to make a breakthrough with the help of the powerful enchantment. Every strike, every block, every step brought him closer to finally being able to complete the foundation of his elusive battle art, to bring his vision of it to fruition. Taking a pained breath, he deflected another vicious attack, hesitated for a split second, and looked away from Nephis. Instead of watching her body and her movements, he instead gazed at her shadow. The shadow shifted slightly, facing away from the glowing ring of the gateway. Its shadow hands moved, raising a shadow sword. The shadow sword fell, aiming to cut the shadow's enemy down. And suddenly it felt as though a door opened in his mind. Everything suddenly fell into place, everything connected. What was fragmented and obscured before now became clear and whole. It was complete. Before Neph's sword could reach him, Sunny evaded it with a slight shift and raised the Midnight Shard. A moment later, he delivered an identical strike, forcing her to retreat. It was as though he had found the answer he was looking for. Changing Star was already attacking again, moving with speed and precision that seemed inhuman. Sunny mirrored her movements, and their blades collided in the air, causing a rain of sparks to fly down. His style changed slightly, growing more graceful, smooth, flowing, deadly, just like hers. Sunny muttered that this was wrong. The point of shadow dance was not to mirror every movement to become a literal copy. It was to understand the very essence of the enemy's style and turn it against them. Sunny scowled and changed his grip on the Midnight Shard slightly, then attacked, manifesting the essence of Changing Star's technique into his own body. Suddenly, he was able to see her intentions with more clarity, understand the pattern of her steps better. He was able to perform every action she had performed, but also those that she had not used yet. After all, he was not a reflection but a shadow. He wasn't replicating Changing Star's movements. Instead, he was replicating Changing Star herself, the very heart of her battle technique. Neph's eyes widened when she felt the sudden change in his style. When they clashed again, Sunny seemed to be able to mirror her every move, throwing the flow of combat into a violent turmoil. His movements were sharper, faster, filled with more meaningful intent. Her attacks slowed down for a few moments, then grew even more violent and ferocious. Only now, they seemed to be less measured, less controlled. It was as though she had lost her absolute grasp on the cadence of the battle and was now compensating for it with brute strength. Sunny suspected that the small advantage he had gained wasn't going to last long. Nephis was too smart and too gifted to allow this lack of understanding to persist. Soon, she was going to see through the guiding principle of his newly established style and adjust to resist it. Even he couldn't predict what was going to happen then. That is why, despite his best judgment, Sunny gritted his teeth and escalated his attacks, sacrificing any semblance of defense in the process. This had to end fast. At first, he was able to see Neph's intentions with a considerable measure of clarity, allowing him to react to her attacks slightly before she started to move. When possible, he mirrored her strikes to throw the flow of the battle into chaos. His own came with a tiny delay, lagging behind the enemy by a fraction of a second. Then they happened at the same time. And then, miraculously, his attacks started to come in advance of Changing Stars, even if the difference was barely perceptible. That was all Sunny needed. In the terrible crescendo of their merciless duel, blood fell to the cracking stone of the gateway balcony like crimson rain. He dashed forward, turning his torso sideways to let the silver longsword miss his chest and rip through his bicep instead. As a blinding wave of pain flooded his mind, Sunny caught Neph's arm with his own, and then, twisting it, brought his fist on her elbow, shattering it. As pieces of bloodied bone tore through her skin, Nephis shrieked terribly and made an awkward move, trying to smash him in the head with the flat of her sword. But because it was now only held in one hand, the force and speed of that strike were not as formidable as that of her previous attacks. Diving under the blade of the silver longsword, Sunny fell to one knee and pushed the midnight shard forward in a horizontal cut, its blade tearing through Neph's abdomen and exiting in a flood of blood from her back. Pulled by the inertia of her attack, Nephis made a step forward and came to a sudden stop. As the sword slid from her grip and clattered to the cold stones, she swayed a little, and then fell heavily to the ground. The radiance of her skin was slowly fading away. With his back to her, Sunny stared into the darkness. After a few moments, he closed his eyes and sighed. It was over. A second or two later, he stood up, turned around and walked toward the broken figure of the young woman, who was still trying to reach for her sword, blood spilling from her mouth. As Sunny's shadow fell on Nephis, she gritted her teeth and spat that it wasn't over yet, that she could still fight. Ruthlessly throwing the silver longsword away with the tip of his boot, Sunny looked at her from above and said in a tired, listless voice that she couldn't win. That it was over, Neph. Then he looked away at the shining dais of the gateway. His face was hidden in the shadows. Sunny said that she was done. He won. Looking at the shining gateway, Sunny tasted that word. Why was it so bitter? Why was it so painful? Why wasn't it sweet and joyous? With a dark grimace, he glanced at Nephis and then turned away. What could he say to her that had any meaning? One of them was going to escape this hell, and the other was going to stay. One was victorious, and the other was defeated. One of them was going to live, and the other was going to die. Any words he could find would be empty. But not empty enough to express the hollow sense in his heart. His feet trembled as he made the first step toward the gateway. To hell with this. Why did his heart have to feel so heavy? Why wasn't he celebrating? He deserved to be saved. He struggled and suffered to get to come this far, enduring countless horrors that would have broken and destroyed anyone else. He bled and fought, clawing his way to this point, never allowing himself to rest or stop growing. He was the strongest. He was the last one left standing. Not the countless nightmare creatures of the forgotten shore. Not Horus, that damned hunchback. Not Gunlog, the mighty bright lord. Not Castor, the strongest even among other legacies. Not even Changing Star, the last daughter of the legendary immortal Flame Clan. No, it was him. A homeless kid from the outskirts with no place to call his own, someone whom no one had ever expected to survive, let alone thrive in the ruthless embrace of the nightmare spell. Whom everyone considered to be below them, an inconsequential nobody with no chance of ever becoming anything else. Well, he showed them all, had he not? Gritting his teeth in anger, Sunny made another step. He snarled to hell with all of them. Behind him, Nephis had finally abandoned her hopeless attempts to reach her sword. As Sunny walked away, she slowly crawled a few steps, then arduously pushed herself and sat up, leaning on a piece of rubble. The light of the gateway reflected in her eyes as she watched him go, hunched, seemingly unable to move anymore. Stepping over a wide crack in the stone that was slowly approaching the shimmering circle of runes, Sunny came to the iron ring. Now, only one step separated him from freedom. But instead of making it, he suddenly froze, looking into the distance with a grim expression on his face. A second passed by, then another. The Crimson Spire shuddered once again, sending more stone falling down. As the light of the artificial sun grew so dim that it was almost impossible to see, Sunny swayed a little. Then turned around and walked back to Nephis. Stopping above her, he lingered for a moment, then kneeled so that their faces were on the same level. Looking Neph right in the eyes, Sunny raised his hands and clapped several times. Finally, he said in a terrible, furious voice that she had almost fooled him and offered her his congratulations. He was one step from freedom and turned back. If that moment hit you, like this episode and subscribe for the next one. Now let us see what Sunny does next. Nephis stared at him tiredly, straining to understand his words. The radiance was gone from beneath her skin, and instead of it, white flames had once again appeared, licking weakly at her wounds. However, their power was almost gone. Instead of healing, all they could do now was stem the bleeding and prevent Changing Star from dying right there and then. A few seconds later, she opened her mouth, letting blood flow over her lips, and said in a low, barely audible voice that she didn't understand what he was talking about. Sunny snarled at her to drop the act. He said her performance was masterful, but reminded her that he was the one who taught her how to lie in the first place, and asked whether she really thought she could deceive him. She was silent for a few moments, then whispered that she didn't understand. He looked at her and asked, his voice shaking with anger, why she had done it. Why? Nephis blinked and drew in a shaky breath, but didn't say anything, looking at him with pain and confusion. Realizing that she wasn't going to answer, Sunny spat the question at her again, demanding to know why she had thrown the fight. She lingered for a moment, then said quietly that she hadn't. A bitter smile appeared on Sunny's lips. Shaking his head, he said that she had almost made it work, that he had almost bought it. But after all of it was done and he could think clearly, some things really didn't add up. They didn't make any sense. No matter how he looked at it, something felt wrong. The spire swayed, drowning their voices in the sound of breaking stone. Not paying it any attention, Sunny continued. He said first that he knew for a fact she was somehow able to support two augmentations at the same time. She had done so while fighting Gunlog, one to enhance her sword, the other to enhance her body. He rarely forgot things, so how could he not remember this? Once she was heavily injured. She had summoned back the flames from the sword and was able to simultaneously strengthen herself and heal those wounds. And yet, she had only used one when fighting him. Funny, wasn't it? Nephis stared at him, not saying anything. Then she uttered that her powers were exhausted. Sunny spat that he would have believed that, maybe if not for her other mistakes. Back at the top of the spire, she had an opportunity to cut off his arm, ending the fight right there and then. That was the best course of action, the swiftest and most effective attack she could have performed. But instead, she chose a less advantageous method and went for his head, striking with the flat of the blade. A grim expression appeared on his face. He said that someone else might have made that choice, but not her, not Changing Star, the Sword Saint. The only reason for her to pass on that golden opportunity was that she never really wanted to win. Didn't she? He looked up and grimaced. pain assaulting his mind like a furious sea. He asked, finally, why she had even stayed there at the top of the tower waiting for him to come. If she wanted to escape, she could have gone to the gateway as soon as she realized what the soul conduit was, not even giving him a chance to save himself. But she did not. She just sat there quietly and waited, ignoring her chance to reach the gateway first. So why? He looked at her and shouted, the pain finally finding its way into his voice. Demanding to know why the hell she had pretended to go all out on him while planning to lose from the start. Nephis stared at him for a while, her face pale and inexorable. Then she sighed and looked away. After a moment, she said quietly that maybe it was because she was far away from home too. Sunny stared at her for a couple of moments, then snarled, demanding to know what that was supposed to mean. Changing Star turned her head and looked at him calmly, then smiled and conceded that he had caught her. She told him to go, that the tower wouldn't last much longer. As she said that, the white flames flowing from her wounds suddenly flashed, growing stronger and brighter. Her injuries started to heal once again, not as fast as in the past, but still with considerable speed. Her eyes shined with fearsome radiance. He gritted his teeth and swore that he would not leave before she gave him an answer. Nephis shrugged tiredly, then looked him in the eyes and asked what it was that he wanted to know. Sunny clenched his fists and demanded to know why she had even fought him if she wanted to let him win all along. She sighed. As he stared at her with burning intensity, Neph said that it was obvious, because if she hadn't, he wouldn't have gone. Turning away, she lingered for a moment. And then continued. She said that people were usually either cruel or kind, but not him. He could be both depending on the situation, either ruthless or compassionate, either cruel or kind. So that was what she had done. She had created a situation that would allow him to be ruthless and cruel, to leave her behind without showing any mercy. Sunny stared at her, his fists trembling. He demanded to know why she would doom herself to save him. What had happened to her goddamned goal? Hadn't she told him that she would sacrifice anything, anyone to achieve it? Nephis looked at him and smiled bitterly. She asked whether he was the only one allowed to grow and change, and whether she couldn't change too. She turned away and said tiredly, her voice full of invisible but crushing weight, that yes, she had said such a thing. But saying and doing were two different things. Once it all started, once all those people were dying because of what she had done, once she suffered defeat after defeat, was more difficult than she could ever imagine. It was distasteful. He shook his head in shock and asked if that was it, if she had just given up, if after all that crap she had just decided that it was too much for her. Changing Star remained quiet for a bit, then slowly shook her head. She said that he didn't really understand her at all. Facing him, she grinned. She said that she hadn't given up, that she hadn't abandoned her goal. She had just realized that she was not ambitious enough. As white flames grew brighter in her eyes, Nephis said that she was going to destroy the spell and all those who stood in her way. She would accomplish everything that she wanted, but she would also do it in the way that she wanted, in a way that suited her desire, without compromising anything, without sacrificing her sense of right and wrong. Illuminated by white radiance, her pale, bloodied face seemed like a face of a demon. She said that manipulating all those people, causing their deaths, she would do it again. She would kill more if she needed to because it was fair and right. She had given them the chance to save themselves or die fighting against the spell. There was no better way. For a moment, her eyes were aflame with passion. However, then her expression suddenly changed. Looking down, Nephis added in a quiet voice that abandoning him here would be vile and wrong. It would leave a bad taste in her mouth, just like leaving a helpless blind girl to die alone would. She wouldn't do it, if she did. She would be no better than those she wanted to destroy. She asked what the point of reaching her goal was if, in the process, she became the same as those whom she hated. She pierced him with a burning gaze and said no, Sunny, her goal hadn't changed. It was just that reaching it by using a wrong path was worse than not reaching it at all. She asked why he cared anyway. Didn't he think that it was insane? Didn't he think that she was despicable and vile? So go. Why was he hesitating? Sunny stared at her, a deep frown appearing on his face. Finally, he said that he was hesitating because of her fool and asked what about her. Nephis smiled. She asked what about her. Did he think she would die here in this tower? No, she said she would be fine, that she would escape it and survive somehow. She would find another way out. No matter how long it was going to take her, she would. Nothing would stop her. He stared at her for a while, then glanced at the shimmering gateway. The crack traveling through the stone balcony was already almost upon the circle of runes, threatening to destroy them. Salvation was so close. He could almost taste it. Turning away from the dais, Sunny shook his head and said that it was a horrible plan. She wanted to travel around the dream realm battling nightmare creatures. Fine, let them do it together. They could try to go through the hollow mountains and reach the human citadels on the other side. And that was just the south. They could also try north, east, and west, searching for an unclaimed gateway. Two of them would have a better chance to survive. The two of them together, it was better than being alone. Right. She hesitated for a long time, then closed her eyes and slowly shook her head. When she spoke, her voice was wistful and tired. She said no, that she couldn't. She couldn't let him stay. She told him to go and meet his sister. There was something waiting for him in the real world, at least. All that was waiting for her was emptiness, bloodshed, and graves. If she returned, the same thing that happened in the bright castle would repeat itself over and over again until there was nothing else. So go while you can. The runes of the gateway shimmered as though on the verge of disappearing. He gritted his teeth and said no. Nephis opened her eyes and looked at him, a sense of sorrow appearing on her face. She told him to leave her, Sunny. Please, go. He shook his head stubbornly and said that he didn't want to. Changing Star was silent for a moment, looking at him with a pained expression. And then she said, making his world crumble, go lost from light. His eyes widened. Deep within his soul, something moved and rose from slumber triumphant. Unbreakable, eternal, irresistible, complete, perfect, and sweet. Before Sunny knew what he was doing, his hand shot forward, the ghostly blade of the moonlight shard appearing in it. He commanded it to stop. His hand froze, the tip of the stiletto mere centimeters away from Neph's eye. Trembling, he looked at his arm and willed it to move forward. But it didn't move at all. It was as though that hand did not belong to him anymore. As deep horror drowned his heart, Sunny moved his gaze and looked at Nephis, his eyes wide with shock. He stammered, asking how she had done it. A sad smile appeared on her lips. She said that Cassie had told her. Neph sighed and looked away. She said that Cassie had been the first one to understand the meaning of her vision. She had known that the two of them would end up fighting each other, and that Nephis was going to lose, maybe even die. She just hadn't known how, when, and why. So Cassie had told her his secret in hopes that it would save her life one day. But Nephis had hoped that she would never have to use it. Sunny stared at her, too shocked to say anything. She smiled sadly and said that she guessed this was goodbye. She hoped that he would take care of himself, Sunny. Now go, she told him. Escape before it was too late. Even though Sunny didn't do anything, his body moved on its own. Standing up, he turned around and walked toward the shining ring of the gateway. Step, step, another step. He tried to command his body to stop, but it would not listen. It just continued to move forward, indifferent to his commands. A dull ache settled somewhere in the center of his heart. He tried again, but there was nothing he could do. He was a miraculous shadow bound to a master. Once the master gave a command, he had no choice but to obey. Sunny slowly walked up the steps of the dais and approached the circle of runes, then crossed the iron ring without slowing down. As soon as he did, the runes shone with intense light. His body began to glow too. Sunny shouted that he refused. The ethereal radiance grew brighter and brighter, until it became hard to discern the human figure in its middle. Sunny cried out one last time, no. And then, suddenly, it disappeared, leaving only emptiness behind. Sunny was gone, finally free of this long and arduous nightmare. The journey back to reality that had taken him more than a year was now over. He made it out alive, just a few seconds after he disappeared in a flash of light. The crack in the stone reached the circle of runes and broke it. The shine of the gateway grew unstable and swiftly faded away. At the same time, the artificial sun of the forgotten shore ignited one last time with a bright, intense explosion of light, and then extinguished. Left alone in the collapsing tower, and with no more light to shine upon her, the beaten, broken figure of Changing Star disappeared into the shadows. End of Volume 2, Demon of Change. Once again, Sunny found himself in the endless space between dream and reality. All around him, there was nothing but a boundless black void, which was illuminated by a myriad of bright stars. Between those stars, countless strings of silver light were woven into a beautiful and inconceivably complex pattern. Once again, he felt as though he had glimpsed the inner workings of the spell. Was it just an illusion, or was he able to see more now? It was almost as though his eyes were now able to discern a hint of meaning behind the unimaginable, titanic brilliance of the ethereal weave. He had the eyes of Weaver now, after all. With a pained moan, Sunny forced himself to look away from the strings of silver light. The magnitude of the secret hidden in this cosmic pattern was so immense that just thinking about it could drive him mad. The Forgotten Shore had taught him an important lesson. And it was that one had to be careful about what they looked upon. Some things were not meant to be seen by humans, not to mention that he had other things to think about. Sunny cursed everything and everyone, his fury bitter and raw. His voice disappeared into the darkness, full of indescribable fury, bitterness, and sorrow. No one was there to hear it, except for the spell which chose to tactfully remain silent. Breathing heavily, Sunny clenched his fists and closed his eyes. He didn't know what brought him more rage and pain, the fact that he had lost Neph, or the fact that his secret had been revealed. Both were too bitter to swallow. All that time, all that suffering. And for what? He had outsmarted and defeated so many powerful enemies, only for his true name to be discovered by an ungrateful, weak, blind girl. After everything he had done for her. Cassie's betrayal, perhaps, had hurt him the most. Sunny muttered a bitter curse against her. Once again, he was a slave. He had made a full circle and returned exactly to where he had started, in shackles. Only instead of nameless slavers, Nephis had become his master now. Nephis. Sunny gritted his teeth and groaned, a storm of conflicting emotions tearing his heart apart. He whispered, asking why she had to do it. The pain of losing her, the hope of finding her again, was just as strong and overwhelming as the hope that she would die and disappear forever in the unforgiving hell of the dream realm, so that they would never have to meet again, so that he would be free. He clawed at his face, not knowing how to process this conflagration of feelings. For someone who had spent most of his life alone, not caring for anything, this was all just too much. Luckily, time in this boundless void was a strange concept, so he had an eternity to try and come to terms with his new reality. The spell kept silent, as though giving him a chance to do just that. After a while, maybe hours, or maybe days, or maybe just a single second, Sunny sighed. Sometime later, he opened his mouth and whispered that he had won. He had survived. Who could have thought? Slightly more than a year ago, he was thrown into a region of the dream realm that no human had ever escaped. And now, he was not only returning to reality, but also doing so as one of the most powerful sleepers in the history of the human race, maybe even the strongest one, or the second strongest. He had survived countless horrors, crossed a cursed sea on a boat made of demon bones, slew hundreds of nightmare creatures, gained experience and scars worthy of a lifetime, touched the hidden knowledge of the gods, saw a tyrant die and a new one be crowned, banished an ancient curse into the darkness of oblivion and watched as a son died. And now he was about to become an awakened, an elite among elites, a person at the very top of society, one with access to the best food, the most wealth, the highest forms of prestige, the highest, everything. All his dreams were going to come true. All his suffering would now be rewarded. Sunny said that he would not be sad. He would not be bitter. He would not be angry and asked who he should be. Had he gone through this nightmare to be left heartbroken on the other side? No. He had earned this joy, this delight, this triumph. And he was going to enjoy it. Slowly, a shaky smile appeared on Sunny's face. At first, he had to force himself, but after a while, the smile became sincere. Sunny mused that victory was supposed to be sweet and wondered what he should start with. As if answering him, the spell finally spoke. Its voice sounded a little strange, as if it was continuing a sentence after being interrupted.
Your shadow is overflowing with power. Your shadow is taking shape.
Suddenly, Sunny felt his soul begin to radiate a strange heat once again. He muttered a quiet curse.
Your shadow is complete.
Something inside of him exploded, drowning his whole being with indescribably suffering. With a startled yelp, Sunny fell down. Sunny grumbled, wondering how he always ended up on his backside every time he came to this place. The first time Sunny had appeared in the void, he was so shocked to discover the divine rank of his aspect that his legs buckled. And now, due to the painful transformation happening to his soul, he ended up in the same situation again. Because he had left the Crimson Spire, the soul conduit attribute was gone, and without its interference. The strange process that had begun due to the saturation of the shadow core was finally able to continue. It was just as painful as Sunny remembered. Gritting his teeth to prevent himself from screaming, Sunny tried to endure that terrible agony. He was no stranger to physical pain, but this was something different. It came from the soul itself, and for that reason was so much worse. He groaned in pain, cursing it all. However, it was still not nearly as bad as the chilling torture he had gone through after consuming the drop of Weaver's blood, or the nightmare he had endured after meeting the Black Knight for the first time. And it didn't last as long. After a while, the pain lessened and then finally disappeared, leaving him feeling refreshed and whole again. Sunny carefully stood up and looked down, checking to see if he was still in one piece. He felt stronger, much stronger. Stronger, faster, more resilient. Very much so. He felt so powerful, in fact, that for a moment Sunny even entertained the idea that he had subconsciously commanded his shadow to wrap itself around his body, and was now enjoying the effect of its augmentation. To make sure that this wasn't the case, he habitually glanced down to check on the shadow, and froze. Sunny breathed, asking what the hell was happening. The shadow was not wrapped around his body. It was where it was supposed to be. On the unseen surface Sunny was standing on, somehow visible despite the darkness of the black void. But it wasn't alone. Two identical shadows were currently staring back at Sunny. One seemed sulking and morose, and the other appeared to be joyful and friendly. Sunny stared at the two shadows, dumbfounded. After a while, he said in an uncertain tone that he was either seeing things or there were two of them. The shadows, of course, did not answer. They had no vocal cords after all, however. The sulking one looked at him with contempt and shook its head in derision. The friendly one, meanwhile, looked down shyly and slightly shrugged. Sunny asked what was going on. Frowning, Sunny lingered for some time and then dove into the soul sea. With the soul conduit attribute gone, it was back to its usual, tenebrous appearance. The surface of the water was tranquil and still, and hundreds of motionless shadows stood silently in the darkness. Above him, shining spheres containing the memories were circling around the... Sunny raised his head, then flinched. Where the black sun of the shadow core had once loomed above the quiet sea, there was now two identical shadow cores hovered in the dark sky, shining with lightless black radiance. He blinked. Sunny breathed that there were two of them. A few minutes passed, or at least something that felt like a few minutes. Sunny muttered that there were two, that he had two cores, and wondered why he had two cores. Humans only ever had one soul core. That was a fact. Only nightmare creatures had more. Sunny looked down at his hands, then made them into fists, feeling newly gained strength course through his muscles. Then he scowled and looked up again. He echoed the spell's words, that his shadow was taking shape, that his shadow was complete. So the spell was not speaking about the bad-tempered shadow that had accompanied him for so long. Initially, Sunny had assumed that the shadow and his core were going through a transformation due to the acquisition of the 1000th fragment, perhaps evolving or even awakening. But the spell actually meant to say that his second shadow, and thus a second shadow core, were complete. They had been assembled from the 1000 shadow fragments he had collected, making him a... what? Sunny hesitated for a bit, then ordered the shadows to wrap themselves around his body. The sulking one seemingly rolled its eyes before obeying the command. The friendly one seemed extremely delighted to do as he asked. Both flowed up and covered his body. Immediately, Sunny felt his already considerable strength double. And then triple. His mouth hung open. Sunny breathed that this was too powerful. This was incredible. To experiment further, he commanded one of the shadows to return to the surface of the tranquil water. A moment later, he had a shadow once again, but still enjoyed the familiar augmentation, even if it grew weaker, returning to its previous strength. He then summoned the Midnight Shard and ordered the second shadow to wrap itself around its blade. Now, both his body and his sword were augmented. Then, he sent the sulking shadow to join the friendly one. His body was not enhanced anymore. But the austere Takai felt much sharper, more lethal, more deadly. Finally, he commanded one shadow to leave the midnight shard and cover the puppeteer's shroud. Two memories were augmented at the same time. Sunny whispered a breathless oath. This was just too good. Sunny stood silently for a while, staring into the distance. So this was it. This was the most unique, most powerful side of his aspect. A divine aspect, after all, was not necessarily more powerful than a lesser one. But it had much more potential. With the second core and a second shadow, the gap between Sunny and the other awakened was going to increase. And if he was right about it, if he was right, this was only the beginning. Because if there was a second core, there would most likely be the third one, and then the fourth. Suddenly, it all made sense. Why Nephis never seemed to be able to saturate her soul core, no matter how many shards she absorbed, no matter how many nightmare creatures and humans she slew, why she had been incapacitated after killing Gunlog, why she was so much stronger, faster, and more powerful than him, even at his peak. It was because her aspect was divine just like his, but she had discovered its secret much sooner than him, as a dull pain appeared in his heart. Sunny banished the image of Changing Star from his mind and summoned the runes. He had to make sure that his guess was right. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Dreamer. Below that, new runes were shimmering in the darkness. Sunny's eyes widened. Class, Monster. Shadow Cores, 2-7. He stared at the glowing runes, his face calm, his heart engulfed by a dark fire. Monster, 2 out of 7. He was right after all. His progression path was indeed different from all of humanity. It was harder, larger, but also so much more promising. The promise of it was as vast as it was frightening. He was reluctant to even try to imagine the pinnacle of what he would potentially be able to achieve. The possibilities were simply limitless. What would a human with 7 cores and the might of a titan be capable of? What obstacles would they be unable to conquer? Who would dare to stand in their way? Who would dare to call them their slave? Of course, the road to creating 5 more cores would be long and arduous. It would take him years, if not decades, if he even manages to live that long. In fact, the magnitude and scale of such an ambition were nothing short of insane. After all, the stronger he grows, the stronger enemies he would have to face to collect their shadow fragments. It seemed all but impossible. Almost. Was he really going to try? After some time, Sunny lowered his gaze and continued to read the runes. His face looked like that of a madman. There were simultaneously a deep frown and a wide smile somehow coexisting on it, making for a strange sight. But then, the wide smile disappeared, leaving only the frown behind. There was something even more important waiting for him in the glow of ethereal runes, something even more frightening. Reaching the lowest part of the field of runes, he read. Aspect Shadow Slave. Aspect rank Divine. Aspect description: you are a miraculous shadow left behind by a dead god. As a divine shadow, you possess plenty of strange and wondrous powers. However, your existence is empty and lonesome. You mourn the passing of your former master and long to find a new one. Right beneath it was the description of the part of the aspect that had cursed his life, turning it into a nightmare. Innate ability, Shadow Bond. Ability description: find a worthy master and let them know your true name. Once they recite it out loud, you will be bound to their will, unable to disobey any command. It is improper for a shadow, let alone a divine one, to walk around without a master. However, the runes describing Shadow Bond were gray and lifeless, as though the ability was now inactive. Makes sense. He had a master now, after all. He wasn't free to walk around without one anymore, and speaking of it. Right below, new runes were now shining in the darkness. Master, Changing Star. Sunny stared at those 3 words for a long time. Who knew that just 3 words could bear such a crushing weight? Such a vast and complicated meaning. Finally, he shook his head slightly and concentrated, making the runes shine brighter, new ones appearing out of nowhere as he watched. Name Nephis, true name Changing Star, rank Dreamer, class Demon. The runes shimmered in the tranquil darkness of the silent sea. Name Nephis, true name Changing Star. Just as Sunny had suspected, that true name hid many meanings. It didn't describe a star that was always changing, but instead a star that caused change. However, there were a lot of words for change in the runic language, each hiding a unique meaning. The one used here meant a cataclysmic change that brought ruin and disaster, sometimes bad and sometimes good, but always cruel and calamitous, wreathed in misfortune. So, in a sense, Nephis was neither a star of change nor a star of ruin, but both. The two went hand in hand, inseparable, destined to bring both salvation and damnation to those touched by her light. Just like what had happened to the doomed dreamers of the Dark City. The spell was really good at giving names, it seemed. Thinking of his own true name somberly, Sunny read further. Rank Dreamer, Class Demon, Soul Cores 3-7, Soul Fragments 2749 3000. He stared at the last two strings, a dark expression written on his face. Sunny murmured that this was how far ahead of him she was. Then, with a heavy sigh, he looked away. Many events of the past few months made sense now. During the fight against Gunlog, Nephis had already been a dormant monster, just like he was right now, a dreamer in possession of two cores. It was because she had known that killing the Bright Lord would push her toward the third that she asked him to prevent Castor from attacking her in that moment of weakness. And in the time since, Changing Star had almost reached the fourth. Sunny muttered, wondering how she had been so fast. Sunny had made a conscious choice to avoid saturating his core during the civil war in the Bright Castle. In hindsight, this decision had turned out to be a wrong one, or maybe not. If he had collected all 1,000 shadow fragments back then, he might have been dead already, killed by one of Tessai's guards or a nightmare creature while completely incapacitated by the formation of the second shadow core. Hell, he would have been crushed to death by a piece of falling granite if not for the soul conduit suppressing the process at the best possible moment. Just as always, terrible misfortune had come together with incredible luck. But even if he had come to possess the monster core back then, he would have never managed to create a third, let alone get this close to the fourth one. It was because Nephis had one big advantage over him in the matter of collecting essence. Like every awakened except for Sunny, she received a certain portion of the enemy's accumulated soul essence when killing a fellow human, while he received only a single shadow fragment, or a few at best, if the enemy was of a higher rank than him. Which hadn't happened yet, but was inevitably going to, considering his luck. The war against Tessai and Gemma must have been a true feast for Changing Star, especially when slaying those experienced members of the host that had long saturated their cores themselves. She was always on the front line after all, fighting, killing, leading her followers. Sunny grimly stared into the darkness for a while, then slowly turned back to the runes. His eyes slid lower. Memories, Dream Blade, Starlight Legion Armor, Dawn Shard, Dark Wing, Nameless Sun. There were a few utility memories, too, including Evertwine, the golden rope he knew so well. But Sunny did not pay them a lot of attention. His sight was attracted to the Nameless Sun. What was that memory and why hadn't he seen or heard of it before? Memory Nameless Sun. Memory rank Ascended. Memory tier 6. Memory type Weapon. Memory description: for a long time, the Nameless Sun suffered in solitude, longing for all the things that was lost. Only when she lost that longing too was the crimson terror of the Forgotten Shore finally born. His eyes narrowed. Sunny murmured that she had received a memory after killing the vessel after all. An ascended weapon of the 6th tier. Sunny wished that he could see its weave and learn what enchantments that terrible memory held. Whatever they were, however, the Nameless Sun was bound to be extremely powerful. But was it enough to help Nephis survive in the ruthless hellscape of the dream realm? He did not know. Frowning, Sunny continued to read the runes. Echoes. Attributes: Dreamspawn, Nephilim, Flame of Divinity, the Fire. Dreamspawn attribute description: you are born of two worlds, belonging to both, but welcomed in neither. Your soul exists on the edge between nightmare and reality. Nephilim attribute description: there once were terrible creatures born of an unholy union between the divine and the profane. Nephilim were the most beautiful and the most harrowing of them all. Flame of Divinity attribute description: your soul is aflame with the light of divinity. The Fire attribute description: you have inherited the lineage of Sun God. He hesitated for a bit, studying Neph's attributes. Sunny murmured that that was how it was. Sunny had always wondered what was her innate attribute, the one that was at the center of all the rest, the core of her being, just like his fated trait. He often thought that it was tied to drive, battle prowess, or will, but it was not. Instead, Neph's innate attribute was called dreamspawn and tied to her nature as a child of a hollow mother. In a sense, she was connected to the dream realm and the nightmare spell from before she had even been born. Her core trait was duality. If his guess was correct, that duality was further expressed after Nephis had conquered her first nightmare and received her aspect, as well as a new attribute, Nephilim. Once again, it described a half-blood creature, half divine, half profane. Half deific, half unknown. Suddenly, he remembered how Changing Star had stopped and stared at the depiction of a radiant being engraved into the walls of the ancient mine below the hollow mountains. Was that creature one of the Nephilim, or a fallen angel from whom Nephilim were supposed to be born? After all, the similarity between that creature and her own powers was hard to deny. And then there was the last attribute, the fire. Sunny rubbed his face. A lineage attribute, somewhat similar to his own blood weave. Finally, the meaning behind that word became clear. Lineage memories akin to the drop of ichor were able to impart awakened with unique attributes that, unlike the usual ones, seemed to be hereditary. They could be passed down through a bloodline and at least one of the great legacy clans. The almost destroyed immortal flame possessed one. Did all great legacy clans, like Song or Valor, possess one too? Was that what allowed them to rise to the very top of humanity and claim their place as great clans in the first place? Sunny muttered that those bastards had so many secrets. Sunny also couldn't help but notice a slight difference between blood weave and the fire. While the latter was described simply as lineage, the former was described as a forbidden lineage. What exactly made blood weave forbidden? Was it because it didn't come from a proper deity like Sun God, but from mysterious Weaver, who was a demon? Had no one except for gods been allowed to leave behind a lineage? The blood weave was also described as a partial lineage, while the fire was not. Sunny mused that there were so many questions. With a sigh, Sunny turned to the runes once again. Aspect, light bringer. Aspect, rank, divine. Aspect, description, you are a creature of light that was banished and doomed to exist in the darkness. You bring radiance and warmth to wherever you go, but with it comes indescribable longing. Aspect, ability, soul flame. Ability, description. Your soul burns with the purest of flames. That flame can both restore and destroy and is both a blessing and a curse. Innate ability, half-breed. Ability descriptions. You can directly absorb a portion of the soul essence of any nightmare creature destroyed by your flames as well as of any human. Flaw, pristine soul. Flaw description, you must suffer to use your power. Sunny dismissed the runes and was motionless for a while thinking. The name of the aspect, light bringer, could be translated in several ways. The first rune could mean both light and fire, and the second meant either to bring or to bear, depending on context. So it could have been fire bearer as well, not that it made any difference. The rest he had already known or suspected, so it didn't surprise him much. Only the strange innate ability, half-breed, was somewhat new. Nephis had mentioned once that she was capable of doing something like that, but without sharing any details. It was also funny that the name of her flaw was pristine soul while his was clear conscience. What a pair they were, one lost from light, the other the source of it. One a master, the other a slave. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes for a second. What else was there to note? The soul conduit attribute was gone. It seemed that the artificial sun or the Crimson Spire itself had sustained too much damage and collapsed, thus removing it. He had escaped just in time. Sunny murmured that there were not a lot of secrets left between them now. Sunny was sure that there was a new rune that Nephis could summon one reading slave. Just like he now had access to all the information about her, she was going to learn everything about him. The unique nature of his cores. The shadow fragments, the true identity of the marble saint, the weaver's mask. She was going to know it all. That could potentially complicate. Before he could finish that thought, however, the spell spoke again, its voice filling the black void with melodious whispers.
The second seal is broken, awakening dormant powers.
Sunny blurted out that he had almost forgotten. Sunny stared into the void with wide eyes. He was about to awaken. Just like after the first nightmare, Sunny suddenly sensed something waking up within him. Back then, it felt as though this new power came from inside his soul as opposed to some external source. This time the feeling was very similar, only more intense, more defined. It was coming from his shadow cores. They were radiating an ethereal, but almost palpable heat. The energy was circulating through his entire body, changing it, making it stronger. It was somewhat similar to the strange feeling he got every time he received a shadow fragment, but so much more powerful. 1,000 times more powerful, and deeper too. With a barely audible gasp, Sunny slowly sat down and crossed his legs, then closed his eyes, concentrating on the transformation. Every fiber of his being was soon full of the mysterious energy. The familiar euphoric feeling overwhelmed him, washing over his mind like a warm wave. However, Sunny wanted to feel more, understand more. He wanted to remember this moment in every detail. It was his triumph, after all. Beneath the physical changes that his body was undergoing to become better, stronger, more perfect, was another, subtle but equally incredible change. It was happening to his soul. Sunny had no words to describe it, but knew that he had never experienced anything as wonderful. The transformation of his soul was not at all painful, like the creation of the second shadow core had been, and not nearly as torturous as the agony that consuming a drop of divine blood had caused him. It felt natural, right, and profound, as though he was coming one step closer to becoming complete to what he had always been meant to be, a better being. Soon, the pulsating waves of heat retreated, replaced by a wave of soothing coldness, the dull ache in his heart that had remained there unnoticed. Ever since leaving the forgotten shore lessened a little, his mind became calm and tranquil. Sunny felt like a sword that had been tempered and fortified in a fiery crucible, a being made of cold, pure, resilient steel. He exhaled slowly and opened his eyes. His body felt stronger, faster, and more enduring, similar to how he felt when wrapped in the shadow. The change was sufficiently pronounced, and he knew that it would only grow greater if he used one or both of the shadows to actually augment him. But it wasn't the main difference. Sunny knew that the actual quality that separated Awakened from the Dreamers was not physical might, but a new innate ability. Just like Dreamers gained the ability to sense and interact with soul cores, the Awakened could do the same with soul essence. But knowing and feeling were two different things. Before, he could vaguely feel his shadow core. The feeling was elusive and ethereal but unmistakable. He felt its emptiness at the start of his journey and felt it brimming with power near the end. Now, that power wasn't contained inside the shadow cores anymore, but broke free, flowing naturally through his entire body. It circulated slowly, coming and going from the cores, passively saturating his bones and muscles with power. Sunny instinctually felt that, with some practice, he would be able to direct the flow of shadow essence to concentrate it in a certain area. He could expend some amount of essence to give his arms incredible, explosive strength for a short amount of time, or feel his legs with the power to jump a dozen meters into the air. In short, it wasn't as though he had become monstrously strong and would be all the time crashing through walls and breaking delicate things by accident. Instead, by wisely controlling his shadow essence, he would be able to gift himself short bursts of truly inhuman physical might. The rest of the time, he would enjoy a much smaller, but still considerable passive effect of his body being saturated with freely flowing essence. Sunny muttered that he needed more training. Sunny could now control the shadow essence by instinct, but if he wanted to truly master it and do it more efficiently, he would have to learn from experienced Awakened. Some instructors at the academy existed for the sole purpose of teaching newly awakened just that, after all. And then there was a whole another layer of combat strategy that he would have to understand and master. Sleepers thought much like mundane humans, only with more power and tools. But battles of the Awakened were much more tactical. While essence always restored itself to the core's maximum capacity, it took time. In the reality of a battle, it was a finite resource. Because of it, one had to be smart and careful about how and when to use it. He would also have to absorb as many shadow fragments as possible to increase the capacity of his cores. Luckily, He now had 2 of them, which already gave him a big advantage over the rest of the awakened. But this new amazing quality he had received was not the end of the awakening. The main event was yet to happen. The spell spoke again, filling him with anticipation.
Awakening aspect ability. Aspect ability acquired. Aspect ability name Shadow Step.
Sunny blinked, then hurriedly summoned the runes. Name Sunless, true name Lost from Light, rank Awakened, class Monster, Shadow Cores 27, Shadow Fragments 0-2000. Just as expected, both of his cores were not dormant anymore, instead becoming awakened. The shadow fragments were consumed to fuel the awakening, bringing him to a stark and sad 0. Sunny muttered that 1,000 fragments were gone just like that. He wasn't really disappointed, though. The amount of essence consumed during the awakening directly corresponded to the starting capacity of the core, and thus, the extent of the physical transformation that a sleeper would go through. By collecting 1,000 fragments and fully saturating his first core, Sunny not only received a second one, but also made sure to gain the best benefits a sleeper could dream of. Very few awakened had ever fully saturated their cores before returning from their first journey to the dream realm, and now Sunny was one of them. The difference was not drastic, but every little bit of power counted in a life-and-death situation. Sunny urged himself to stop stalling. Impatient, he banished the thoughts of cores and shadow fragments and found the description of his new aspect ability. Aspect ability, Shadow Step. Ability description: you can move freely between shadows, traveling from one to another in an instant. Looking at the shimmering runes, Sunny soon discovered that there was a stupid grin on his face. He asked whether that was teleportation. That was, without a doubt, a form of teleportation. An ability such as this was a game changer. His mobility would become truly incredible. Not only would he be able to apply it to traversal, making his future ventures into the dream realm easier and safer, but it could also play a decisive role in a battle. What was more deadly than an assassin capable of appearing out of nowhere and disappearing from sight in a blink of an eye? Not many things, really. Of course, he would have to experiment and learn the true extent of this amazing ability. What was its range, for example? Would he be able to jump to any shadow in sight, or to any shadow in the range of his shadow sense? Did a shadow have to be deep and large enough for him to fit through, or would even the smallest and faintest of them do? And what about his own shadows? Would he be able to send one to a certain spot, and then step out of it, just like Saint usually did? He couldn't wait to learn, but before that there were 2 other things he had to see. One was the new memory he acquired. The other one, and the one that filled him with nervous anticipation, was much more important. It was the relic he was supposed to receive for mastering the first step of the shadow dance. With a legacy relic in his hands and a lineage attribute coursing through his blood, Sunny would be theoretically eligible to create his own legacy clan. A great clan, even. Not that he was planning to, but before Sunny could glance at the corresponding runes, the spell suddenly whispered into his ear.
Wake up, Sunless.
And instantly, the black void full of bright stars and silver light disappeared. On one of the underground levels of the Academy Hospital complex, in a small room that was filled with the massive rectangle of the dream pod and various pieces of medical equipment, a delicate girl with pale blonde hair was sleeping beneath the transparent glass lid, her face surrounded by wisps of cold vapor. Suddenly, a series of lights ignited on the surface of the pod, and the medical machinery in the room came to life, producing various noises. A few moments later, the girl opened her striking blue eyes and screamed. On a top floor of a private care facility in the center of a city, in a spacious room with tall windows and a luxurious interior, a state-of-the-art sleeping pod stood silently, bathed in sunlight. An attending nurse sat in a comfortable chair beside it, monitoring the vital signs of a beautiful young man who slumbered inside. For the past 3 years, there had not been a single minute when the young man was left alone. His pod was surrounded by fresh flowers, and someone was always there to keep watch. For 3 years, the flowers and nurses came and went, but the young man had remained the same, Nothing about him ever changed. Suddenly, the nurse opened her eyes wide. A second later, the sleeping pod shone with bright light. Its lid swiftly slid sideways and hid in a special housing slot. The figure inside was slowly raising in the air as if pulled up by an invisible force. The beautiful young man was levitating. The nurse remained motionless for a few seconds, stunned. Then she hastily ran to the panel on the wall and pressed a call button. In a small apartment in one of the less prestigious areas of the city, in a tiny room, a tall young woman was lying in an old and barely functioning pod. This one was possibly the last representative of its model, taken out of production a long time ago. Still, it seemed like the most luxurious thing in the apartment by far. The door of the room was open, letting in the sound of a news broadcast. A pleasant and confident tone was currently saying, "Unusual number of awakenings. Dear viewers, we are currently receiving a report from our correspondents and will be able to update you on this event shortly. The representatives of the great legacy clans, meanwhile." Suddenly, the sound of the broadcast was cut out, replaced by a heavy, hopeless silence. Soon, the sound of tentative steps could be heard, approaching the room where the pod stood. Just a second later, however, a fist slammed into the armored glass of its lid from inside, sending a net of cracks through it. Back in the academy, in a room identical to the first one, the lights suddenly blinked and then went out. It was now shrouded in absolute darkness. Something crashed down with a thunderous noise. And then a pained human voice hissed, "Damnation!" A moment later, the lights came back, revealing the figure of a lithe young man with pale skin and dark hair standing near an overturned medical monitor. There was a disoriented, confused expression on his face. The lid of the sleeping pod was still closed. However, it was empty. And a few hundred meters away, hidden even deeper underground, there was another room. This one was slightly bigger and much better guarded than all the others. In it stood a simple sleeping pod. Beneath its transparent lid, a young woman with ivory skin and long silver hair slept, undisturbed by anything. Despite the growing commotion outside, inside the tranquil room it was quiet and peaceful. Nothing changed. The pod did not shine with bright lights. The medical equipment remained silent. Imprisoned in the glass coffin of the sleeping pod, the young woman continued to dream, as if cursed to remain in her nightmares forever. Sunny looked around the small room, slowly realizing where he was. Academy? He was back at the academy. He had returned to the real world. He looked around, noticing the medical equipment and the sleeping pod, all of which were currently ablaze with the light of alarms. The pod was still closed. Sunny muttered, "How the hell did I get out?" Speaking of which, looking down, Sunny realized that he was naked. To avoid any awkward situations, he summoned the puppeteer's shroud. Once the armor weaved itself out of black strings and covered his skin, he felt a lot better. He did, however, have to force himself to not summon the midnight shard as well. His instincts screamed, demanding him to arm himself in an unfamiliar environment. But this was the real world. He had to adjust his behavior. The decision to cloth himself turned out to be the correct one. Just a few moments after he had made it, the door of the room opened, and a woman in a white coat rushed inside. Noticing Sunny, she froze. Her eyes widened in horror, and she raised a hand to cover her mouth as though suppressing a scream. Sunny wondered aloud what was wrong with her. Sunny frowned, blinked a couple of times, then looked at his reflection in one of the medical machines. Oh. Since both sleepers and awakened traveled to the dream realm in spirit, his actual body was whole and pristine, without even a single scar. However, the same could not be told about the puppeteer's shroud. The silk armor was torn and dirty, looking like rags. What's more, it was covered in so much blood that it was hard to tell that its fabric was once gray. Looking at the doctor in embarrassment, Sunny forced out a smile and said in a raspy voice of someone who had not spoken in more than a year, venturing a hesitant greeting and asking if he could maybe get some clean clothes. The woman stared at him for a few moments, then said in a trembling voice, breathing the words, "Slee, awakened sunless. Sir, you are awake." "Sir, did she just call me sir?" Sunny grinned. Sunny replied, "I sure hope so. I've been sleeping for a year and 2 weeks after all." The doctor finally seemed to relax and looked at him with a relieved, joyous expression in her eyes. A few moments later, she smiled slightly and said, her voice full of sincere admiration, "Welcome back to the real world, sir." Hospital complex and the administration of the academy were in complete chaos today. Weeks following the winter solstice were always a busy time for all the people working on the periphery of the awakened society, since most of the sleepers who had ventured into the dream realm that year usually returned in a span of 1 to 2 weeks, very rarely a month. Those who had survived, of course. The sudden awakening of so many sleepers who had been gone for years, counted as irrevocably lost, created a shockwave that spread through entire humanity, and people at the academy were at the epicenter of that storm. It was a joyous chaos, nevertheless. In a small office at the surface level of the hospital, a young woman dressed in black slacks and a white blouse was sitting behind a desk hastily compiling a short report. She had dark brown hair, neatly tied into a high ponytail, and thick glasses that were constantly sliding down her nose, forcing her to push them back up. The young woman was one of the administrative workers tasked with the initial debriefing of returning sleepers. As such, she had seen a lot of incredible things and heard a lot of incredible stories, and sadly, even more heartbreaking ones. But today was like no other day in her career. The sleepers that she was debriefing today were all anomalous, each and every one of them. The things they told her made her blood run cold and her imagination fail. She even had an urge to dismiss their reports as false, but knew that it was nearly impossible. The lie detection technology built into the walls of the office would make lying very hard to pull off. Teddy murmured, "Incredible. They are incredible, every single one of them." To survive for that long in a region of the dream realm, completely cut off from the rest of the human territory, one populated by nightmare creatures much more powerful than any dreamer could ever become. The achievement of these brave young men and women was truly remarkable. It filled her with a sense of compassion, pride, and hope. Humanity received an unexpected but wonderful gift today, finishing the report and sending it to her superior. The young woman pressed a button to let the next sleeper know that it was their turn to come in. The door of her office opened, and a pale young man with dark hair entered the office. Because of the nature of her job, she was accustomed to interacting with incredibly attractive people. Almost every awakened was pleasant to look at, after all. The young man in front of her was far from being the most outstanding in terms of appearance among them, and yet, for some reason, she was unable to look away for a couple of moments, a natural smile somehow finding its way onto her face. There was something elusive about the young man that attracted attention, almost demanded it. He was of small height with a delicate, slender build and perfect white skin. His dark eyes had a humorous, slightly mischievous spark in them. The young man wasn't exactly handsome, but due to his small stature, pale complexion, and dark hair, he looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. And there was a subtle strangeness about him. The young woman couldn't quite put it into words, but it seemed as though his every move, every word was ever so slightly not exactly how they should have been. Not really wrong, but also not completely right. This quality was equally as disturbing as it was magnetic. It was the reason why she couldn't stop paying him a bit more attention than to all the other sleepers she had interviewed today. The young man smiled and sat down opposite her. In response, her own smile widened a little. Teddy greeted, "Good day. My name is Teddy, and I will be your interviewer today, awakened." Of course, she already knew his name. His file was opened on the screen in front of her, containing all the information the Academy had on the pleasant young man. But it was important to create a friendly environment to allow the sleepers to relax. After their experiences in the dream realm, most were tense and on edge, second to last place in the ranking. Poor kid, I can't even imagine what horrors he had to survive. The young man answered in a pleasant tone, offering, "Sunless, but people usually call me Sunny. So, awakened Sunny, I guess. No, that sounds weird. Just call me Sunny." Teddy nodded, then typed a few words on her pad. Teddy said, "I will ask you a series of questions about your time in the dream realm. The purpose of this briefing is to enrich our base of knowledge about it, as well as let us know how to better assist you in the future. Any little bit of information you can provide might help future dreamers in their own trials, but you don't have to answer if you don't want to, of course. Awakened Sunless, Sunny, nodded seriously. Sunny said, I understand. I promise to be honest and tell you only the truth. I am a very honest person, you see. Teddy smiled and asked the first question. How long have you spent in the dream realm? Sunny sighed. Sunny replied, a year and a few weeks, although it felt much longer. That matched the information in the file. This is so terrible, a whole year out there. She smiled with encouragement. Teddy said, I see. You did very well, Sunny. Very few dreamers had managed to survive for that long, especially in a region such as the Forgotten Shore, right? He shivered slightly before answering, yeah, that's what we called it. Teddy typed a few more words. Teddy asked, from the interviews with the other dreamers, we have confirmed that the region of the dream realm you were sent to is populated with nightmare creatures of the awakened rank and above. Can you confirm that information? The young man grew a little paler and nodded again. Sunny answered, yeah, awakened fallen, corrupted too, although those only appeared at night. Teddy added a couple of lines to her report and asked, have you participated in the battles against such nightmare creatures? If so, how many have you killed? Sunny was silent for a second, then raised his hand and began counting on his fingers with a thoughtful expression. Sunny ventured, 3 or 4. She began to type and thought. 4 awakened creatures. That poor kid looks so weak, and yet he managed to defeat 4 abominations much more powerful than him, despite being in second to last place of the ranking. Good job, Sunny. You are truly admirable. But Sunny didn't finish speaking. Sunny added, hundreds. Teddy froze, staring at the monitor. Teddy breathed, excuse me. The young man thoughtfully scratched his chin and said, yeah, I think that's right, around 400. After a long and awkward silence, he asked, I am sorry, Teddy, is everything all right? She nodded slowly, then forced out a smile. Teddy conceded, everything is fine, Sunny. I am sorry. We'll have to pause the interview now. He looked at her with sincere surprise and blinked a couple of times. Sunny asked, really? Why? She cleared her throat, then answered in a small voice, I'm afraid that I'm not qualified to conduct this interview. My superior will be with you shortly, son. Awakened Sunless. Please wait for a few minutes. Sunny sighed. Sunny said, oh well, all right, it's been nice to meet you. With that, he gave her a bright smile. Sunny left the office of the government agents in a strange mood. The conversation went exactly as he had planned. Even after a higher-ranking specialist had been called in, he managed to steer the interview in the right direction, manipulating both answers and questions to achieve the desired result. In the end, he wanted everyone to know that he was someone exceptional, but not so exceptional as to overshadow the best of the best, someone who was in the very highest tier of young awakened, but also at the very bottom of that tier. Even though he had kept his most outrageous accomplishments to himself, it felt weird to give away so many secrets about his skill, power level, and achievements. Sunny had grown so used to pretending to be a pathetic clown that removing that mask to reveal another, less outlandish mask was not easy for him. And yet, it was something he had to do. After he had awakened, there was not a single moment for him to properly think things through. He had to go through a series of medical and psychological tests, followed by a lengthy debriefing. However, he had been able to realize one thing very clearly. His situation had fundamentally changed. Now that his most important secret was revealed and Nephis had become his master, it was as though a crushing burden had been removed from his chest, replaced by another, even more terrible weight. In any case, he could finally allow himself to relax a little, for a while at least. Not because he trusted her that much, but because she was currently imprisoned in the dream realm, unable to enforce her control over him even if she wished to. In a sense, as far as his worst nightmare becoming reality went, this was the absolute best version of how things could happen. He had a lot of time to think about countermeasures and prepare for whatever the future held. After all, walking through the corridors of the hospital complex, Sonny was engrossed in thought. One thing he was sure about was that a divine shadow like him could only have one master, so he didn't have to worry about someone else finding out his true name and enslaving him, not anymore. The guillotine blade that had hung above his neck all that time was now gone. However, he still kept the existence of his true name a secret for one simple reason. He didn't know what was going to happen if Nephis died. Would he be free forever, or die with her? He felt that neither of these theories was correct. Firstly, because the description of the aspect described him as a divine shadow that had lost its master, which probably meant that he could lose another one and remain alive. Secondly, because the runes of the shadow bond had become gray and lifeless, but did not disappear, which meant that they might shine with ethereal light once again in the future. So, the most probable explanation was that he would be safe as long as Nephis remained alive. And if she was killed, anyone would be able to use the true name against him once again. A deep scowl appeared on his face. How long could anyone survive in the decimated remains of the forgotten shore? The dark sea was gone, but so was the sun. Most of the nightmare creatures were dead, but the strongest ones survived. It seemed that Changing Star had escaped the collapsing Crimson Spire, at least. What was she going to do now? Try to cross the hollow mountains to reach the human citadels, or try her luck in the unexplored regions to the north, west, or east? What were the chances of her making it back to the real world alive? If it was anyone else, Sonny would say that the probability was 0, but it was Nephis after all. For some reason, he was sure that she would survive somehow. So yes, even though many things remained unclear, his situation had fundamentally changed. He was an awakened now, which meant that there were countless possibilities in front of him. To get access to the best opportunities and the most advantageous treatment, he needed one thing: status. At this point, continuing to pretend to be a weakling would only be a hindrance. Sonny wanted to reap as many rewards as he could without putting himself at risk. That's why he shifted his usual pattern of behavior and gave the government agents enough information to paint himself as an exceptionally talented awakened. Not that he had a lot of choices. Sooner or later, people were going to learn at least some things about his time on the Forgotten Shore and see that a weakling simply would not have survived all that. Luckily, there was no shortage of exceptionally talented individuals who had awakened today. On any other day, Sonny's description of his prowess would have made a huge splash. But currently, he was just one of 100. Speaking of that 100. Turning a corner, Sonny suddenly found himself in the middle of a small crowd of people. Dozens and dozens of young men and women were standing in the middle of a small hall, most dressed in the simple training clothes provided by the hospital, just like he himself was. On their faces, there was an indescribable kaleidoscope of emotions: joy, sorrow, worry, anticipation. Most were looking at a small screen displaying a long list of names. These were the survivors of the Dreamer Army. Not everyone was here, of course. Some spent many years on the Forgotten Shore and had been transferred to other facilities by the government or their families. Sonny didn't see Sation, Kai, or Effie, or Cassie. His face darkened. The absence of the first two made sense. Kai was probably being cared for in an expensive VIP care facility, while Sation had to be kept in the stronghold of her clan. However, he had no idea where the other two were. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then looked at the list of names displayed on the screen. Before he could read anything, however, someone quickly approached and hugged him tightly. Sonny muttered, "What the?" Looking up, Sonny saw a vaguely familiar young man holding him in a passionate embrace. A moment later, the young man let go of him and looked down with glistening eyes, exclaiming, "Sonny, you are here too." Before he could even answer, a somber expression appeared on the young man's face. In a voice that trembled with emotion, he said, "Thank you. Thank you so much, Sonny. If it wasn't for you and your shadow, we would have never made it to the gateway." At the sound of these words, the others turned around. As soon as they saw Sonny, bright smiles ignited on their faces. A hum of voices rose from the crowd. "Guys, it's Sonny. "Thank you, man. We will never forget what you did for us." Sunny stared at them, dumbfounded. Sunny muttered, "Weird. This is so weird." Ever since he had come to his senses near the sleeping pod, mundane humans were treating him with the utmost respect. They even went so far as to use honorifics, calling him Sir or Awakened Sunless. And now this. Why was everyone so friendly and happy to see him? He had never experienced anything like this before. Was this what it was like to be an Awakened? After dozens of young people came closer to shake his hand or happily pat him on the shoulder, he awkwardly smiled. Sunny offered, "It's nice to see you two guys." The young woman who was currently facing him smiled in response. Then, however, her face turned dark. The sleeper girl asked, "Have you heard anything about Lady Nephis after coming back?" He stiffened, then shook his head. Sunny asked, "No, have you?" She turned back to the screen, tears appearing in her eyes. The sleeper girl said, "Nothing. None of us did. Out of everyone who made it to the spire, only 2 are unaccounted for. We think she is still inside." Sunny remained silent for a while, then asked, "Who is the second?" The young woman sighed. The sleeper girl answered, "Sir Castor. No one had seen him near the gateway. He must have gone to help her hold back the terror and... Her voice trembled. She went on, her voice breaking. "Someone said that he died. Oh gods, what if Lady Nephis dies too?" Sunny lingered for a few seconds, a grim expression on his face, then squeezed her shoulder lightly and quietly walked away. The hospital staff had provided each of the newly awakened with a small room at one of the underground levels of the complex, to have a place to rest and get accustomed to their new abilities while waiting for more permanent accommodations, if they were going to remain at the academy, of course. It was also a place they could take their families to talk and spend time together in privacy. Currently, many emotional reunions were taking place in similar rooms around Sunny's. Made especially joyous and heartbreaking because the survivors of the Dreamer army had spent long years on the Forgotten Shore. They had gone through hell, indeed, but their loved ones in the real world had suffered a great deal as well. Not that Sunny would know anything about that. No one had been waiting for him to return after all. In any case, the room he had been provided with was sufficiently comfortable. There was an area for training, a desk with a pitcher of water and some snacks, a sofa, and even a bed. None of the returned were going to sleep, of course. Not for a few days, at least. At the very end of the field of shimmering runes, Sunny could now see a new string of symbols. Gateway. Usually, the name of the gateway that an awakened had last used would be written there. This was their anchor in the dream realm. Every time an awakened fell asleep, they would be transported to the gateway they were anchored to spend some time in the dream realm, either as much as they wanted or as little as possible, only until their soul was ready to travel between worlds once again, and then go through that gateway to wake up back in reality. However, the gateway of the Forgotten Shore had been destroyed. For that reason, every single survivor of the Dreamer army now had no anchor in the dream realm. That didn't mean that they would remain in the waking world forever, though. Rather, it meant that they were going to be transported to a random one as soon as they fell asleep, just like during their first journey into the land of nightmares. The prospect of being at the mercy of the spell once more was nothing short of terrifying, especially for Sunny, who had the misfortune of always finding himself in only the most extreme of circumstances. However, the situation wasn't really that bad. There was a way for a newly awakened to change their anchor without relying on chance. It was to acquire the services of a saint who would be able to take them to the dream realm without involving the spell appearing near the saint's own anchor. Of course, that anchor would most likely be situated in one of the human citadels, allowing the awakened to anchor themselves to a gateway in human territory. There were just a few dozen saints alive across all of humanity, so for an average awakened, their help was not easy to get. However, Sunny was not an average awakened. In fact, none of the survivors of the Dreamer army were. Every year, the most promising of the newly awakened were recruited by powerful citadels and provided the means to anchor themselves to their gateways. Everyone profited from this arrangement. The talented awakened received a chance to change their anchor if they wished to do so, while citadels received new powerful defenders or useful craftsmen to enhance their living conditions and infrastructure. With how extraordinary the 100 survivors of the Forgotten Shore were, and how unusual their circumstances turned out to be, there was going to be a small recruitment war happening in the next few days. Prosperous citadels were going to fight for the right to add these outstanding young people to their populations, promising better and bigger rewards, as though during an auction. The government would inevitably get involved, too, helping those who for some reason failed to find a citadel to call home. The survivors of the Dreamer army just had to remain awake long enough to make a choice and settle the details of their future anchors, since their physique was far superior to that of mundane humans. They didn't have to sleep every day, so 2 or 3 were not going to be a problem. Sonny had a lot to do in these few days. The first thing he had turned his attention to after retreating to his personal room was test the limits of Shadow Step. The result of these tests left him pleasantly surprised. Just like he had suspected, the ability to travel between shadows was akin to a weird form of teleportation. He could enter a shadow that was large enough to encompass his body and instantly appear from another. The distance of that jump, however, was not too large. Currently, it was even smaller than the range of his shadow sense, around a dozen meters or so. However, he knew that it would increase as he absorbed more shadow fragments, just like the range of shadow control had increased back on the Forgotten Shore. There was an exclusion from that rule, too. He was able to travel between his own shadows no matter how far apart they were. By now, he could control his shadows from as much as a couple of kilometers away. That meant that, if both were sent into opposite directions and reached the limit of the shadow control range, he could potentially instantly cover about 4 kilometers of distance in less than a second. And that was just one side of Shadow Step. The other was arguably even more miraculous and unexpected. Before, Sonny could move through shadows as though he was one of them, becoming practically undetectable. But now, he could literally become a part of the shadows, diving into them and becoming incorporeal. Not only did it make him completely undetectable by means of sight, hearing, and smell, but it also allowed him to move with incredible speed through any uninterrupted shadow, no matter how long and vast it was. In that state, he was invulnerable to physical attacks, but also unable to perform physical attacks of his own. It also felt very strange, sort of peaceful. Sonny had to constantly remind himself to concentrate and not forget what he was doing. That ability would become truly incredible at night or in the depths of some terrible cave system, like the one they had traveled through on their expedition to the Hollow Mountains. In short, Shadow Step was incredible. However, it came at a price. Unlike Shadow Control, which was as natural to Sonny as breathing, using Shadow Step required him to expend essence. The more distance he covered with a jump, and the more time he spent as an incorporeal shadow, the more essence he would have to consume. Sonny suspected that the theoretical 4-kilometer jump would eat through all of his essence, leaving both of his cores dry as a desert. Spending essence was not the same as spending shadow fragments, of course. His soul always slowly generated essence, eventually filling his cores to their maximum capacity, while shadow fragments increased that maximum capacity and were used to create new cores as well as turn echoes into shadows. Still, he also needed essence to fight effectively and use the more powerful enchantments of higher rank memories, so balancing its expenditure was an intricate task. Truly, becoming an awakened had opened a whole new layer of both incredible opportunities and insidious problems. It was a lot to take in. But he was going to get there eventually. Sitting on the floor of his temporary quarters, Sonny sighed and summoned the runes. Finally, it was time to reap his reward. He had worked so much and done so much to get here. First, repeating the same sword strike thousands of times, day after day, until his hands bled and his muscles screamed from the pain. Learning the basic katas and movements of Neph's flowing battle style, then gaining enough insight into it to make it his own. Almost dying to receive the gift of clarity, then fighting against the Shadow Saint and slowly incorporating her grounded technique into his, studying the movements of his shadow to catch the slight difference in how it held itself, then spending countless hours trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind it, until his mind was ready to boil. Solving that mystery and traveling into the past to observe the birth of the nameless temple slave and the beautiful dance of his mother. And then, torturous practice and arduous process of turning his vision of the elusive and wonderful battle art into reality, only to finally succeed in the middle of the furious, bloody battle against Nephis. Of all his achievements, this was perhaps the one he was proud of the most, because Shadow Dance was entirely his. It was something he created out of almost nothing, something that bore and expressed his individuality. Sunny had never received any type of inheritance, so this legacy, which was created by himself and for himself, held a special place in his heart. Looking at the shimmering runes, he read, Aspect Legacy Shadow Dance Mastery Level 1-7, First Relic Claim, Second Relic Unearned, Third Relic Unearned. Holding his breath, he concentrated on the runes describing the first relic and whispered, Claim. As Sunny watched, the runes glowed brightly for a few seconds and then changed. First relic claimed. And a moment later the spell spoke softly into his ear, You have received an Aspect Legacy relic. You have received a Shadow, Soul Serpent. Sunny stared at the runes for a while, then slightly tilted his head. Sunny murmured, A shadow. What an unexpected boon. Usually, a legacy relic came in the form of a memory or very rarely an echo. Perhaps there were some other types of relics out there, but he had never heard of them. That didn't mean much, though. By now, Sunny was reasonably certain that there were a lot of things that he, as well as the rest of mundane humans, had never heard about. Awakened kept a lot of secrets. Nevertheless, receiving a shadow pleasantly surprised him. Looking up, he saw new runes appearing out of thin air. Shadows, Marble Saint, Soul Serpent. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then furtively looked around. The small room was empty and quiet. Feeling a little bit stupid, Sunny shook his head and summoned his new shadow to take a good look at it. A slight breeze moved his hair, and in the next second, nothing happened. Sunny let out a confused sound. Sunny frowned and looked around the room, then scratched the back of his head. Sunny demanded, What the hell? Where is the damn snake? He had hoped to see a giant serpent made out of shadows appear in front of him, with black scales as thick as plate armor, and a mouth wide enough to swallow his enemies whole, or an average-sized snake at least. But there was nothing. He even checked to see if a new shadow joined his two invaluable helpers, but no. Both rested on the floor, one seemingly content, the other bored and in a perpetually bad mood. Sunny muttered, Weird. He raised a hand to rub his eyes but froze at the last moment. Sunny asked, What is that? There was something dark on the skin of his wrist, peeking out slightly from beneath the sleeve. Following intuition, Sunny hastily stood up and took off the top of the training suit provided to him by the staff of the hospital complex. Left naked to the waist, he then looked at himself through the eyes of the shadow. Out there on his pale skin, an intricate image of a black serpent was tattooed, so detailed that it almost seemed alive. The serpent coiled around his arms and his torso, its tail resting just above his right hand, its head just above his left. Sunny breathed, What? I have a tattoo now. In the darkness of the small room, the serpent almost seemed to move under his skin, two curved fangs threatening to break its surface. It was striking, beautiful, and disturbing. Of course, Sunny recognized the serpent immediately. Both the nameless temple slave and his mother had a very similar image marking their skin, after all. It was the shadow god's mark. But why did his new shadow turn into a tattoo? Confused, Sunny listened to his body and soul, trying to feel if something had changed about them. And soon he did notice a small difference. The flow of the shadow essence through his body had changed. If previously it had circulated naturally, now it seemed to follow the coils of the serpent, moving faster and with more intent as though directed by them. Soul Serpent. Does that thing enhance my shadow essence control? To experiment, Sunny poured essence into his limbs and then performed several movements of shadow dance. After that, he jumped from one shadow to another a few times, expending even more essence. He felt the difference instantly. Not only was he able to control the essence better, but it also seemed to be consumed at a slightly slower pace and restore at a faster one. Soul Serpent served as a channel for it, existing both on the material and the spiritual plane. As such, it was connected both to his cores and to his body, creating a strange bridge that allowed Sunny to use his shadow essence with better efficiency. Sunny remarked, "This is a very useful shadow." Those words were an egregious understatement. Sunny had already understood how important and vital managing essence was for the awakened. Any tool that could enhance that aspect of their power was truly precious, and he got such a marvelous one, practically for free. He was also sure that the serpent would only get more powerful in the future, provided he kept it well fed, of course. But how was he supposed to feed memories to a tattoo? Perplexed, Sunny thought for a bit, then finally concentrated on the runes once again. Shadow Soul Serpent, Shadow Rank Dormant, Shadow Class Monster, Shadow Attributes, Shadow Guide Soul Weapon, Shadow Description. When the end came, Shadow was the last of the gods to be destroyed. Many have resented him for creating death, but in the end death embraced all. Noting the interesting detail of a connection between Shadow God and death, Sunny lowered his gaze. However, the last string, the one he had been accustomed to paying the most attention to when it came to Saint, was missing. There was no indication of how many shadow fragments it would take to make the serpent evolve. Sunny frowned. Come to think of it, that strange shadow was clearly connected to his soul. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence that it was a monster. Sunny was a monster himself, after all. So maybe the serpent would not evolve its class like Saint had, by consuming the soul core of a suitable nightmare creature. Most likely, it would grow alongside Sunny himself. But why was it of the dormant rank, while Sunny had already become an awakened? Maybe its rank was not tied to Sunny's soul, but to his comprehension of the shadow dance. Currently, he had mastered only the first of the 7 steps of the battle art, and the serpent belonged to the first of the 7 ranks. Would it evolve to a higher rank if he mastered more steps? Full of thoughts, Sunny sighed and turned his attention to the shadow's attributes. Shadow Guide Attribute Description. Soul Serpent guides shadow essence as it flows through your body. Soul Weapon Attribute Description. Soul Serpent can assume the form of a weapon. Sunny blurted, the form of a wait, what? Sunny blinked a couple of times, then stared at his left wrist, where the head of the Soul Serpent was drawn under his skin. Its scales were so intricate that it almost seemed as though the creature was moving. Now, it really was moving. Following Sunny's mental command, the Soul Serpent slithered up to his hand and then escaped from it, turning into a dark blade. As the coils moved across his body, the blade grew longer and longer, until a hilt wrapped in black leather rested comfortably in his grip. The tattoo was gone. Sunny found himself holding a lusterless greatsword. It was a menacing, formidable, foreboding odachi. Including the hilt, the odachi was as long as he was tall. It was surprisingly light for its length, but heavy enough to inflict truly devastating wounds. Almost invisible on the dark steel, and lifelike image of a coiling serpent was etched into its blade. He weighed the greatsword in his hands for a while, then smiled darkly. Truly, this is a weapon worthy of a shadow. It was still weak, though. If it was a memory, it would have been only a dormant one of the 2nd tier. Sunny was going to have to put in some work to make the dark odachi really fearsome. With a sigh, he commanded the serpent to slither back onto his body and then to disappear entirely. A few seconds later, his skin was clean and empty once again. Sunny mused, "What a bountiful harvest I had today." Sunny stared at the darkness for a few minutes, then sighed heavily. It was time to do something that he had dreaded doing ever since returning to the real world. He couldn't put it off any longer. In a heavily guarded underground room, a young woman with silver hair was sleeping in a transparent machine that kept her body alive. Her face was pale and thin, painted by the ghostly glow of machine lights and deep, angular shadows. The room was peaceful and silent, the hum of machinery creating low background noise. From time to time, a piece of medical equipment produced a sound and grew quiet again. A blind girl with piercing blue eyes stood quietly near the sleeping pod, an empty expression written in the delicate lines of her beautiful face. If it wasn't for the fact that her hand rested on the hilt of an elegant rapier, a person would easily mistake her for one of the hollows that were cared for on another level of the hospital complex. The door of the room did not open, however. There was suddenly another presence inside. A young man with pale skin and dark, cruel eyes appeared out of the shadows and walked over to stand on the opposite side of the sleeping pod. His steps were soft and quiet. He lingered for a while, then looked down at the young woman sleeping beneath the glass lid of the mechanical coffin. For a second, his face became contorted by a terrible grimace. Grief, anger, fear, and longing mixed in his eyes, then disappeared, hidden behind a mask of cold indifference. Sonny stared at Nephis for a long time, trying to get his emotions under control. He knew that seeing her like this, weak and helpless, would affect him. But he didn't know just how much it was going to hurt him. He also had not anticipated how dark the thoughts entering his mind would be. I can kill her right now. One strike of the moonlight shard, and I'll be free again. But no, he couldn't. Firstly, because there was no guarantee that Nephis would die if her body was destroyed. Just like there were hollows, people whose souls had been destroyed while leaving an empty body behind there were lost. People whose bodies in the real world had died, leaving their souls wandering the dream realm. He suspected that this was the reason why the people who wanted Changing Star dead had sent Castor to kill her in the dream realm instead of infiltrating the academy. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, he simply could not bring himself to harm Nephis. Not again, not anymore, and not like this, Sonny muttered. Cassie, on the other hand. With a dark grimace, Sonny slowly moved his gaze to the blind girl. As though noticing it, she turned slightly and said, "Hello, Sonny." He stared at her, his eyes burning with fury. Sonny demanded, "What you can see now?" Cassie lingered for a moment, then shook her head. Cassie replied, "No, but something like that." A wild grin appeared on his face. Sonny snapped, "Congratulations, really good for you. You won't be useless anymore, at least." He knew that his words were going to hurt her, and was glad to say them for that reason. The blind girl didn't react and just continued staring into the emptiness, her eyes cold and distant. But he wasn't fooled. He knew her well enough to recognize the ocean of pain hiding behind that coldness. Sonny snarled, "Good, suffer, you deserve this." Sonny opened his mouth, wishing to accuse her, but then forced himself to stop. He had to keep himself under control. Swallowing his angry words, Sonny gritted his teeth and spat. How did you even know?" Cassie hesitated for a bit, then answered quietly, "When you killed that spy from the castle, you said it out loud then. I saw it. In a vision. After that, the rest was not impossible to figure out." His eyes widened. Sonny remained silent for a long time, trying to deal with the shock that her words had caused him. Sonny breathed, "Harper, when I killed Harper." The memory of that horrible day sent a shudder through his soul. He remembered it so vividly. The blood streaming down his hands as he held the pitiful young man down, murdering him, giving in to the agony of the flaw, and whispering in a hoarse, barely audible voice, "Lost from light. I am lost from light." Standing in the underground room of the hospital complex, Sonny wanted to both laugh and cry. So this is it. This was what did me in. One mistake, I only made one mistake, and it was all it took to undo me. It was almost as though Harper had managed to avenge himself from beyond the grave. Well, he had never gotten a grave, really. Sonny just dumped his body in the ruins for the nightmare creatures to feast on. A lot of good it did him in the end. Piercing the blind girl with a burning look, he said through gritted teeth, "So that was why you were waiting for me back then, why you gave me the eternal spring. You were ready to say goodbye. You knew." Cassie slowly faced him, then said in a steady, even tone, "Yes, I did." Sonny looked down, clenching his fists. Sonny demanded, "You knew, if you knew, then why didn't you try to change anything? Why curse you?" Cassie stared at him, her calm expression finally collapsing. Pain, sorrow, and anger contorted her face, and with a voice so hurt that it almost sounded as though she was bleeding, she answered, "Didn't try. Of course I tried. I tried everything I could to make the future I saw change. But no matter how much I tried, it never did. It always remained the same. Even worse, my attempts only made it appear even more inevitable." Turning away, she gritted her teeth and remained silent for a while, her hands trembling. Cassie said, I was the first one to understand what my vision of the Crimson Spire meant, shadows devouring a dying angel. I understood it on that very day." Cassie closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke again, her voice quiet. Cassie asked, "Don't you remember? I even asked you to promise to always protect her. And what did you say?" Sunny stared at her, remembering. Yes, at the very start, there had been a conversation like that. Sunny conceded, "No, I said no." A fragile smile appeared on Cassie's face. Cassie said, "Yes, you said no. And on that day, I knew that I had to make a choice. And I made it. I chose Neph." She shivered and hugged herself as though dying of cold. Cassie said, "I had to betray one of my best friends to save the other. And I did. I chose to sacrifice you to save Neph. Of course, I fooled myself for a while, telling myself that nothing bad would happen. That if I helped Neph, maybe both of you would survive. But deep down, I knew that it was just one of the possible outcomes. So what was the difference? I betrayed you. And you know what?" A small, bitter laugh escaped from her lips. Cassie said, "It was for nothing. I betrayed my best friend and nothing still changed. I sacrificed you but couldn't save anyone. Despite it all, I couldn't change fate." Sunny stared at her for a while, then snarled, "That's it. That's your speech. That's what you have to say for yourself. What do you want me to do, pity you?" A furious gleam appeared in his eyes. Sunny demanded, "After everything I have done for you, after I saved your life countless times, took care of you as though you were my sister, this is how you chose to repay me. By giving my biggest secret to Neph, so that she could use it against me when the time came." Cassie remained silent, not saying anything. Sunny demanded, "Do you even know what you've done? Do you even know what you've taken from me?" She hesitated for a bit, then answered quietly, "I didn't know why or how my vision would come true. I only knew that it would happen in the Spire. So I gave your secret to Nephis, hoping that she would survive thanks to it." Sunny laughed, then grew quiet. An oppressive silence settled between them and remained unbroken for several minutes. After a while, he finally said, "I can understand. Rationally, I do. You were forced to make a terrible decision, with both choices being a betrayal. And you chose to help Neph, who was with you first, who saved you when I would have just left you to die." But then a cold gleam appeared in his eyes. Sunny hissed, "But that doesn't mean that I can forgive it. You go to hell, Cassie. Go to hell and die there for all I care. I hope that I will never see you again." With that, Sunny turned around to leave, but then stopped. He couldn't help but be cruel to her one last time. Sunny added, "Oh, and that secret. It was the reason why she got stuck there all alone. So, in a sense, you have doomed both of your friends." As he spoke those words, Cassie flinched. A satisfied, vindictive smile appeared on Sunny's face. But why did it hurt him so much to say those words? Sunny said, "So, congratulations. You've made it back, Cassie. Go back home, spend time with your family. Didn't you tell me that your mother makes the best eggs? Eat your fill. Try to enjoy them, knowing what you did." As the blind girl paled and turned away with a broken expression on his face, he smiled bitterly and dissolved into the shadows. Bonds of friendship were such a fragile thing. They were so hard to create, but so easy to break. All it took was a moment. Sitting with his back against the door of his room, Sunny stared ahead, his heart empty. He had lived most of his life alone. 1 year ago, he had entered the dream realm alone, and now he was alone once again. But not having something was very different from losing it. Now that he knew how precious true friendship and affection were, existing without them felt like torture. It felt like there was a bleeding wound on his soul. left there after he had so cruelly severed the tether connecting him to Cassie, one of the very few people he cared for in this world. Hurting her felt good and justified, but instead of relief, it only brought him more pain. Nevertheless, he did not regret what he had done. Sometimes one had to endure suffering. Sometimes pain was necessary. Now Sunny was completely alone, so was Cassie, and somewhere in the dream realm Nephis was alone too. The three of them had done the impossible but paid a heavy price for it. Sunny muttered, "What a fiasco." Who would have thought that one day he would not only escape the forgotten shore, but also become vastly more powerful than he had ever dreamed, only to sit on the floor in a dark room, feeling miserable. With a resentful grimace, Sunny shook his head and sighed. Sunny muttered, "Enough of wallowing in self-pity." He had a lot of things to do, a lot of plans to make. The horrors of the forgotten shore were now behind him, but new threats already loomed in the distance. Firstly, he was now at the mercy of another person. Despite the fact that his master was lost in another world with very low chances of ever making it back, Sunny felt that they were fated to meet again. He didn't know how to feel about that. Or rather, he both desperately longed for Nephis to return and wished that she died. His emotions for her were intense, overwhelming, and an absolute mess. Despite all that, Sunny didn't think that she would die. Somehow, he was sure that Nephis would not perish in the dream realm and eventually make it back. Maybe in a few months, maybe in a few years, but she would achieve the impossible once again and return to the real world. The question was, how? Would she travel to the human territory through the hollow mountains, or head in another direction? They didn't know much about what surrounded the forgotten shore from the east, west, and north. He doubted that those places were better than the horrifying, misty mountains, though. That doubt was based on one simple fact. There was no information about them, which meant that no human had ever returned from those regions of the dream realm to tell the tale. Although deadly, hollow mountains were at least known to mankind. Chances were, Changing Star would choose to try her luck there instead of venturing into the unknown. Nothing was more dangerous than that you knew nothing about after all, Sunny murmured, "Unknown." Sunny frowned. That was another problem he had to face, or rather, an opportunity he would potentially be able to exploit. Due to his fated attribute, Sunny had stumbled onto the legacy of a creature named Weaver and got a glimpse into the secrets of the gods. What he saw there left him both terrified and breathless. There was a boundless mystery hiding in the ruined land of dreams and nightmares, a tapestry that connected the dead gods, the unknown, the demons, and the nightmare spell together. The former rulers of the dream realm were gone, but the spell remained, and humanity, including Sunny himself, had now become an unwilling part of that tapestry through it. Sunny's most ardent desire was to control his own fate, and he couldn't achieve it without knowledge. Now that he knew what to look for, he had to deepen his understanding of the fate of the gods and the origins of the spell. Who knew maybe that was where the keys to his freedom were hidden? And then there were the sovereigns. His face grew dark. Sunny muttered, "Honestly, why is everything so complicated? Why couldn't he just open a memory store, become wealthy and fat, and leave peacefully ever after?" That was his plan all along. However, the recent revelations made Sunny doubt the validity of such plans. Judging from what Castor had said, there were some figures hiding in the shadows ruling over the human world. And not only were they there, but Sunny was also, apparently, unwillingly doing their bidding. He still remembered the warning Nephis had given him once. She told them that there were words that could get him killed simply if he learned of their existence. Well, now he knew a lot of those words. Sovereigns, domains, lineage, memories. Was he going to pretend to know nothing and hope that those powerful beings would not turn their gaze to him one day? Or was he going to do something to prepare for the day they do? Did he even have a choice, knowing what he did, with his fate hopelessly entangled with that of Changing Star, who was embroiled in these clandestine machinations just by virtue of her birth? So bothersome. What was he supposed to do? What was the plan of action? Sunny sighed. Well, it was simple, really. Learn as much as he can about the sovereigns, but in a way that would never lead back to him. Explore the past of the dream realm to gain insight into the demons, the gods, and the unknown. But first and foremost, grow stronger. Much, much stronger. When Nephis returned, he had to be ready for the worst. Sunny didn't really think that changing star he knew would abuse her power over him. In fact, he was almost sure that she wouldn't. Not only because of the bond between them, but also because in Neph's warped mind, doing so would simply be beneath her. However, he wasn't going to let this sweet hope prevent him from creating contingencies. If she ever decided to truly make him a slave, one of them was going to die. Standing up, Sunny walked over to the desk and wrote on a piece of synthetic paper. 02000. Then he summoned the runes, glanced at them, and added a second string of numbers. 2749 3000. However, the runes shimmered and changed before he was done writing. The number of soul essence grew bigger. Sunny stared at the runes for a few seconds, then corrected the number. Then he put the pen down and looked at the piece of paper in front of him. 02000, 2773 3000, Sunny said. All right. So this was it. This was the plan. From now on, this was his life's goal. The initial series of tests, the interview with the government specialists, the somber conversation with Cassie, and the hours Sunny had spent pondering about his past, present, and future took up almost an entire day. A new dawn was already bathing the world in soft sunlight, which Sunny knew because one of the walls in his underground room was made into a false window, with a vista of one of the parks in the academy being projected onto it from a remote camera. He was experiencing mild mental fatigue, but was not sleepy at all, at least not yet. Truly, the physique of an awakened was much more resilient than that of a mundane human. There were still a few things he had to do. In all the turmoil of the past 24 hours, he had not gotten a chance to take a proper look at his memories, for example. Sunny was about to summon the runes when, suddenly, there was a knock on his door. He flinched. What? Who can it be? For a moment, a mental picture of Effie and Kai appeared in his mind, but then he dismissed it. The two of them must have been as busy after their awakening as he was. Much more, most likely, considering that they probably had friends and families to deal with, too, on top of everything else. With them being in different facilities, coming to the academy just to pay him a visit was not a likely scenario. Certainly not that soon. Hiding one of the shadows on his body to appear like a normal person, Sunny walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was a striking, confident woman in her late 20s. Immediately, it seemed as though the temperature inside of the room dropped by a couple of degrees. She had short, raven black hair and icy blue eyes. Her flawless skin was smooth, supple, and as white as snow. The woman was dressed in a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and black leather boots. The jacket of the uniform was casually unbuttoned, revealing a tank top that was currently drawn taut against her full.
What are you staring at, awakened sunless?
Sunny looked up with wide eyes. Sunny blurted out a startled curse.
Master Jet, I was just appreciating your fashion sense.
Indeed, it was Soul Reaper Jet, the Ascended who worked for the government and had welcomed him back to the real world after the first nightmare. Sunny had sometimes thought about this beautiful woman during his journey into the dream realm. Not only because the 3 pieces of advice Master Jet had given him ended up saving his life on multiple occasions, but also because she was from the outskirts, just like him, knowing that someone as unfortunate as that had managed to not only survive, but even thrive in the ruthless reality of the nightmare spell had given fuel to his determination, as well as providing vital perspective. But what was she doing at his door? Sunny studied Master Jet, suddenly full of doubt. She looked exactly as she had a year ago, the only difference being that her uniform had more wrinkles, and there were now dark circles under her eyes. As he watched, she grinned.
My fashion sense. Why, thank you. If you want, I can introduce you to my tailors. You will have to sign a few thick contracts to receive a comfy suit such as this, though.
Sunny forced out a smile.
I see. Those tailors are slightly out of my price range, I'm afraid, but thanks for the offer. Master Jet, it is very nice to see you again, but to what do I owe the pleasure? I am sure that you are too busy to visit every random returnee.
She looked at him for a couple of seconds, then suddenly yawned and shook her head to chase away sleepiness. After a short pause, he had cautiously asked what brought her here.
Correct, but since there's some procedure you still have to go through and we already know each other, I thought that I'd do the honors.
With that, she looked around the deserted corridor of the hospital complex with a dubious expression, lingered for a couple of seconds, and then asked if he wanted to grab a bite to eat. Sometime later, the two of them were walking through the ground level of the Academy Hospital. Sunny had thought that Master Jet would take him to the cafeteria there, but instead, she headed toward the exit.
Where are we going? I thought that cafeteria was this way.
She looked at him with confusion, then grimaced slightly.
Hospital food, no thanks. Let me take you to the instructor's lounge. That's where they keep the really good stuff.
Sunny coughed.
But Master Jet, you're not an instructor.
She smiled, then pointed to the 3-star insignia on her left sleeve.
Technically, I'm not, but the academy is a government facility, so I outrank most of the people here. What are they going to do?
He blinked a couple of times, then shrugged. Indeed, what are they going to do? Tell a master to get out. Who would be that suicidal? As they exited the hospital complex and walked across the academy grounds, Sunny couldn't help but throw furtive glances at the confident young woman, not because he was mesmerized by her, but because seeing her again was a strange experience. Back when they first met, he was just fresh from the first nightmare, barely accustomed to his new status as a sleeper. Being in the presence of a master was like standing in front of a legend. He remembered vividly how much fear and awe this beautiful stranger inspired in him, how acutely he felt the measure of ease with which she would be able to kill him if she wished. All it would take was a flick of her finger. Now, slightly more than a year later, so much had changed. He was still pretty sure that he had no chance of taking her in a fight, a fair one at least, but the reverent fear was gone, replaced by simple respect. Sunny knew that he had it in himself to, if not win, then at least survive a confrontation with someone like Jet. In a sense, he was now half a legend himself. As he thought about how different things had become, the two of them approached a small, picturesque building near the center of the academy. Without slowing down, Master Jet walked past a few people that were staring at her with a strange mix of regard and disdain, and entered the instructor's lodge. Oh, right, I remember Teacher Julius mentioning that she has a terrible reputation. To be exact, he described her as a murderous savage, barbarian, having a problematic personality, and psychopathic killer. No wonder people were giving them weird looks throughout the whole walk. For some reason, Sunny suddenly felt annoyed. Maybe because Jet was someone he knew, or maybe because she used to be an outskirt rat just like him, but he found himself feeling protective. Stare away, bastards. See if we give a damn. Master Jet clearly didn't, so why would he? Sunny looked at the next person to give her a dirty glance coldly, activating the murder math to its fullest potential. Immediately, the onlooker paled slightly and turned away. Sunny smiled.
That's right, look away. Now, the most important part. Let's see what the instructors eat.
At first glance, the interior of the instructor's lounge seemed simple and cozy. Most of the furniture was made out of wood, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Bright sunlight streamed through the tall windows, which were opened slightly to let in the chilly winter air. However, his eyes widened slightly when Sunny realized that all the wood around him was natural, not synthetic. Noticing his expression, Master Jet smiled slightly.
Let me guess, you have never seen that much real wood in one place.
Sunny hesitated, then gave her a nod. Sunny replied, only in the dream realm. The young woman grinned, moved a chair back with her foot, and sat down at one of the tables.
Where do you think all this came from?
He looked around, seeing the instructor's lounge of the academy from a completely new perspective, then silently sat down, lost for words. Master Jet summoned the menu, made a selection, then leaned back and tiredly rubbed her face.
Believe it or not, the chair you're sitting on is made out of a dead titan.
Sunny stared at her, shocked. Suddenly, he had a strong impulse to jump out of the chair. Sunny breathed, "What?" She chuckled and gestured around.
All of this actually. Back when Bastion was first established, it was surrounded by a vast, and very hungry, forest. The whole thing was one giant nightmare creature. Clan Valor spent decades at war with it, losing many knights. In the end, the forest was destroyed, leaving behind a lot of high-quality lumber. And here we are.
Sunny scratched the back of his head, then cautiously knocked on the wooden table. The thing seemed dead, but he decided to remain alert, just in case. It had once been a part of a titan after all. Soon their food arrived. Sunny half expected for it to be delivered by an actual echo, but luckily, it was brought by a mundane automated server. Taking his plates off the motorized tray, Sunny stared at the feast in front of him with wild eyes. There were fried potatoes, baked beans, juicy roasted meat, a salad made out of real vegetables, a bowl of fragrant soup, several pieces of oven bread, butter, jam, and even chocolate pudding for dessert. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. It was also his first time seeing some of these things in real life. Suddenly, the position of a research assistant once promised to him by teacher Julius did not seem so unattractive. Master Jet waved at him and concentrated on her own food, not wasting any time on manners. Sunny assaulted his breakfast with the same level of ferocity as when battling nightmare creatures. Some time later, with his belly on the verge to bursting open, he pushed away empty plates and leaned back with a satisfied smile on his face. Master Jet glanced at him with a dry smile.
What did I tell you? This is where they hide the good stuff.
Sunny looked at the empty plates with regret and sighed.
Yeah, although after a year of eating almost nothing except for monster meat, I would have been satisfied even by synth paste.
Her smile dimmed at the mention of the most common food in the outskirts. As 2 glasses of beautiful dark tea steamed in front of them, Master Jet sighed, then took out something from the inner pocket of her uniform. It was a small metal box with a sensor on its lid. Placing the box on the table, she looked at Sunny and asked,
You must be wondering why I visited you, right?
Sunny tilted his head slightly, stared at the metal box for a few seconds, and then answered in a cautious tone.
Yes, to be honest, I am very curious.
She nodded, then smiled reassuringly.
Don't be nervous. It's just a formality and a very beneficial one at that. Put your finger on the sensor.
He hesitated, then did as she had told. The sensor buzzed for half a minute, and then a small green light ignited on the metal box. With a quiet click, it unlocked. Master Jet opened the box and took out several objects. A slick communicator made out of flexible glass, a memory chip with the government seal etched on its surface, and a small iron badge with 2 stars engraved into it. Pushing them towards Sunny, she lingered for a moment, and then said in a light tone,
Congratulations, awakened Sunless. You are now officially a citizen, of the 7th rank no less.
Her words struck Sunny like a hammer. Silent, he stared at the 3 objects in front of him, his face not betraying even a hint of emotion. A citizen. Back in the outskirts, people lived and died dreaming of becoming one of the true citizens. That simple word hid so much meaning: access to proper food, human rights, and better life. To all the things that none of them really had. To having a future. Very few of these people had ever gotten the chance to hear the word citizen in connection to their name. Being poor and lowly only led to becoming destitute and falling to the bottom. It rarely led to rising higher, let alone soaring to the peak. And here he was not only becoming a citizen, but even jumping over all the steps and arriving at the very pinnacle of the social hierarchy in one go. Not just a citizen and not even one of high rank, but of the highest, 7th rank. There's literally nothing higher. Finally, his expression changed, becoming grim. Looking up at Master Jet, he asked in a somber tone,
I get it that I would be made a citizen after awakening, but 7th rank, isn't that a little too much?
Master Jet laughed.
Sunless, you don't really know what you did, do you?
Sunny looked at her without humor, then said,
I'm pretty sure that I do, but please enlighten me.
She shook her head and sighed.
Listen, of all the sleepers that had returned from the dream realm in the last few years, there are only 5 whose files were marked as SS, and you are one of them.
Sunny stared at Master Jet, a strange expression frozen on his face. After a while, he asked,
Oh, that's great, but what the hell does SS mean?
She smiled and sipped her tea, looking at him across the table. Placing the cup back down, she then shook her head slightly and said,
The government and the powerful legacy clans, of course, keeps track of every awakened in the world. That shouldn't be a surprise for you, right?
Sunny slowly nodded. Sunny agreed. Yeah, that makes sense. Master Jet shifted slightly, then continued.
Firstly, because every awakened technically has a duty to respond when a gate opens near their location. That's what the special communicator is for. In exchange for all the privileges we receive, we have to protect this world from the nightmare creatures.
A dark grimace appeared on her face.
Of course, realistically, no one can force you to actually fulfill that duty, or at least no one is going to. Many awakened turn around and run as soon as they receive a gate crisis alert.
Sunny grimaced. On one hand, he understood such a reaction perfectly. Why would they want to risk their lives for random strangers? Not every awakened was good in a fight, too. Not everyone was like the artisans of the Dark City, who had gone into battle side by side with those dreamers who possessed combat aspects. But on the other hand, the idea of running away while monsters were devouring mundane humans and wreaking havoc in the real world simply rubbed him the wrong way. It seemed as though Sunny had somehow developed a bit of pride in the past year. He didn't want to run from the nightmare creatures and capitulate to the spell. He might have even been infected with having morals. Oblivious to his thoughts, Master Jet continued.
Secondly, newly awakened are monitored because everyone wants to recruit the best of them. Talents need to be nurtured, and for that they need to be recognized first. So the most promising awakened receive a mark on their file. Usually it's SA or simply S rank. Do you know what that means?
Sunny shook his head. She grinned.
SA means strategic asset. There's not a lot of awakened who are considered to be important enough to be assigned that designation. Having one means that you are viewed as a person who can potentially be important to the very survival of humanity, or at least, make an impact on the global scale. Simply put, it's either someone whose aspect can be extremely useful to society or someone who has a high chance of becoming a master, maybe even a saint.
Master Jet took another sip of tea, then gestured lazily at herself.
Like me, not to brag, but people with the S-rank designation are few and far between. That's why we usually receive a lot of attention and support from either the government or the legacy faction we decide to align with. But here comes the best part.
She grinned.
Currently, everyone is running around and foaming at their mouths because of you guys. All 100 of those who returned from the Forgotten Shore were marked as strategic assets. That is an unprecedented event in human history. A sudden appearance of 100 powerful awakened is not that important in the grand scheme of things, but if those awakened all have a very high chance of becoming masters, maybe even saint, that would be enough to completely shatter the current status quo.
Sunny stared at her, thinking. Up until now, everything that he heard was in accordance with how he had imagined things to be, but...
I get it, however, what's that about me being marked as SS? What does SS stand for?
Master Jet nodded.
I was about to explain. Above those marked as strategic assets, there are those marked as special strategic assets, SSA or SS for short. This designation is even rarer. Actually, very few people had ever gotten it. What it means is that you are considered to have a very high chance of becoming a saint. You know how rare transcendent are, right? So, of course, everyone now wants to be your friend. including the government, hence the 7th rank citizen status.
She looked at him with an apologetic smile and added,
Granted, out of the 5 people with the SS designation, you are the least outstanding. No offense.
Sunny glanced at her and smiled slightly. Sunny replied, None taken. Who are the other 4? Master Jet shrugged.
3 of them are the only ones who received true names from the spell after leaving the Forgotten Shore. Awakened Athena, Awakened Kai, and Awakened Kasha. The 4th one is Awakened Song Se Shan, who is, well, from one of the great clans. To be honest, your own achievements, while still incredible, pale in comparison to theirs. But someone had noted that you went from being the second to last in the academy rating to leading 100 sleepers to the gateway during the last leg of the journey. You are seen as someone with great growth potential, in short.
He nodded, somewhat satisfied by that answer. Sunny conceded, It's not as bad as I thought. Actually, it was perfect. It was exactly the result he had hoped for, to be considered one of the best, but also the worst of the best. He needed status to receive all the best opportunities in this world. He needed to have value. Looking at the beautiful ascended in front of him, Sunny took a sip of the tea, then smiled brightly.
So, that really sounds great, a great honor and so on. But what I really want to know is what exactly can I get thanks to being the 5th most incredible person of an entire generation?
Master Jet laughed and glanced at him with approval.
Good, straight to the point. Well, that depends. What is it that you want the most?
Sunny didn't hesitate before answering, his tone steady and firm. The smile disappeared from her face. Looking down at her tea, Master Jet lingered for a while, and then said wistfully,
Then you're out of luck. I am sorry, but freedom is just a myth, Sunless. No one is free in this world. Mundane humans have to toil and struggle to remain alive. Even if they are fortunate enough to reach the height of success and acquire great wealth, their lives still belong to the awakened who protect them from the nightmare creatures. But the awakened, we are not free too. Our lives belong to the spell.
She paused, then added with slight sadness,
If we want to survive its trials, we need to tether ourselves to others, be it powerful clans or the government, or even just the members of our cohort. We have to depend on our allies and companions, and they in turn have to depend on us. All of us are chained to one another, Sunless, and that is the only way we can survive. So, think again about what you want. Think carefully.
Sunny stared at her for a long time, his eyes full of a dark, deep, heavy emotion. After a while, he sighed slowly, then said,
If that is the case, then I want to be strong.
Master Jet looked at him for a while, then smiled.
Perfect, that is a good goal to have, especially for people like us.
She took a sip of tea, then closed her eyes for a few moments.
All right, there are many ways to become strong, some more straightforward than others. Ideally, you would want a powerful organization backing you up, but that is not the only way. In fact, such a partnership is a double-edged sword. You gain a lot, but also have to give a lot in return. I'll provide you with the basic information, and you can decide for yourself.
Sunny straightened a little and listened to her attentively. Master Jet thought for a few seconds, and then said,
In this next few days, you will have to decide what citadel to go to. That is not the same as joining a faction, but closely tied to it. Usually, young awakened have to compete for the right to join a desirable faction and therefore be taken to the citadel it operates from. Your case is different, though. Everyone wants you, and I mean everyone, so you can pick any of the human citadels in the dream realm to call home.
She paused, yawned, and then continued.
As you should already know, there are 3 great human citadels in the dream realm, as well as many smaller ones. The primary citadels belong to the great clans, while the smaller ones can be either ruled by a lesser clan or remain independent. Regardless, all of them are situated around the 3 main human enclaves and tied to them in one form or another. No matter where you go, you'll be in the sphere of influence of one of the great clans. It's just that you can be either in its center, close to the center, or on the periphery.
Sunny scratched his head. Sunny asked, "What about the government? Doesn't the government control many citadels?" Master Jet shook her head.
Out there in the dream reel, the government has less influence than the great clans. It does, however, maintain a presence in all the important citadels, which allows us to play a unique role. In the dream realm, we serve as a connective tissue between the three factions, I guess. That flexibility has its own benefits, if you ask me.
She knocked lightly on the table and said,
In any case, even if you decide to refuse the obvious choice of settling in one of the great citadels, you'll have to select one of the three territories. They are not connected, as some people think. In fact, there are deadly and extremely hazardous regions separating each of the human dominions from each other. So, that is going to be your first decision, which territory to choose.
That made sense. If Sunny chose to go to Bastion, for example, he would have the opportunity to build a relationship with the great clan Valor, which ruled it, or any of the lesser clans in its sphere of influence. He would lose the opportunity to be recruited into the great clan Song, though, or any other clan that existed in a separate human territory. And so on. Master Jet finished her tea and looked at the empty cup with a solemn expression. Master Jet finished her tea and looked at the empty cup with a solemn expression. Sunny's expression darkened. Castor's face suddenly appeared in his mind, eyes full of disdain. What had the proud scion called him? A mongrel. Well, that mongrel got to your throat. Who's laughing now? Master Jet had a similar kind of expression on her face. Had she experienced her own share of hardships because of her lowly background? Most likely. As Sunny was pondering what Master Jet's path to becoming an Ascended must have looked like, she sighed, then smiled with irony. As Sunny choked on his tea and did an actual spit take, Master Jet laughed.
Marriage, what marriage?
She shook her head.
How do you think legacy clans recruit talents? There are patronage contracts, adoptions, and matrimony, the latter being the preferred method when it comes to true gems. Anything to enhance the bloodline, you know.
As Sunny stared at her with wide eyes, Master Jet chuckled and continued.
In any case, these are your options. You can go with the government, one of the three great clans, or a lesser clan. Each will provide you with plenty of incentives to join them instead of others. The most wealthy factions will even shower you with soul shards. You and I both know how important those are. Few people can refuse such an offer.
She sighed wistfully, lingered for a bit, and then added,
Of course, you can also remain independent. In that case, you won't have any special support outside the usual benefits of being a highly regarded awakened, be it in the form of training, resources, or access, but you also won't be tied down by any obligations, free to travel around the dream realm as you wish, making a living by hunting nightmare creatures or providing useful services to your citadel of choice. There are plenty of independent awakened out there. Although few who are truly successful, it's a tough way to live.
Sunny rubbed his face, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the cornucopia of choices in front of him. He had no need for soul shard, but being showered in them still seemed like a great experience. Master Jet grinned. He hesitated for a while, then said,
I don't know, that's a lot to take in. I'll have to think about many things before making a decision.
She nodded, as though that was an expected answer.
Good, nothing good can come from rushing such a matter.
With that, Master Jet took a small, secure plastic container out of her pocket and pushed it to Sunny. He took it and raised an eyebrow. Sunny asked, "What's that?" She shrugged.
A pack of military-grade stimulants to keep you awake for a while. Don't use more than one patch at a time. Wait, why am I explaining this to you? You're from the outskirts, so your knowledge of stimulant use must be extensive. In any case, with that, you'll be able to stay lucid for about a week. Contact me when you're ready to make a decision and I'll arrange the rest. Oh, also feel free to call me if you have any questions. Scratch that. Not any questions, just important ones.
She stood up, stretched a little, and gave him a little smile.
Well, it's been nice seeing you awakened sunless. You did well staying alive out there. Warms my heart to know that another one of us did. I'll be off then. Time waits for no one and all that.
She turned around to walk away, but Sunny stopped her. She glanced at him in confusion. Jet replied, "Yeah." Sunny hesitated for a bit, then raised his newly issued, expensive, slick communicator.
I don't have your contact.
Master Jet stared at him for a while, then grinned. Feeling his ears turning slightly red, Sunny coughed, but then took hold of himself and said with an easy smile,
Yes, how else am I going to call you when I've made a decision?
The beautiful woman shook her head, then took his communicator and entered her contact information into it. Returning the communicator to Sunny, she looked at him and said,
I can't wait to hear from you, awakened sunless. See you later, then.
With that, Master Jet walked away, leaving Sunny alone at the table. Looking around, he sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said quietly,
I wonder, can I get another of everything I ate? That'd be great.